Hello everyone, and welcome to Techstrong TV. Today is Tuesday, October 25th, and I hope you all are having a wonderful day so far. I'm your host, William Willis, and in today's show, we're going to bring you some fantastic interviews with incredible guests from around the world. So stay tuned. As always, I'm going to start off with our Techstrong news recap, filling you in on the biggest tech headlines that are making waves. Then we go to Alan, where he speaks with Deepak Giridhara Gopal, Chief Technology Officer at Puppet by Perforce, to discuss the tech labor market, the increased need for responsive security measures, and what's next for operations communities. Alan then meets with Ryan Kuchova, Head of Customer Strategy at Jellyfish, to learn about Jellyfish's efforts to take the lead in the DevFinOps sector with their new product, Jellyfish DevFinOps, specifically made to address the issues of cost capitalization. Then we are airing episode 32 of DevOps Unbound. In this episode, Alan and Mitch are joined by Chris Riley of HubSpot, Nora Jones of Jelly, Paul Bruce of Tricentis, and Shamim Ahmed of Broadcom as they debunk the myths of testing and production and discuss why it is important for your business. Then we go to Open Source Summit Europe, where Mike spoke with Dr. Ibrahim Haddad, Vice President of Strategic Programs for AI and Data at the Linux Foundation, as he explained why the newly established PyTorch Foundation will advance artificial intelligence. Also at Open Source Summit Europe, Mike also sat down with Marcos Figueiredo, Global Offering Manager for Fujitsu, as Marcos talked about the Japanese conglomerate is contributing to the open source Kubernetes community to make data management simpler. We're then joined by our very own Cody J. Brown, who will hop on and tell us more about some of our upcoming webinars. Next up, we are airing episode 2 of our series, Engineering the Change. This series will follow the 3 winners of the Engineering the Change Scholarship Program as they tackle a 10-week intensive coding bootcamp and prepare themselves for careers in software engineering. Then, Mitch will speak to Reza Shafi, Vice President of Product at Kong, where Reza discusses how Kong's latest features will help developers streamline their workflows, enable businesses to modernize their API strategies, and ultimately improve the end experience for customers. Mitch will also talk to David Hustis, President and CEO of OpenNMS Group, to discuss the 30th release of its Horizon technology. Finally, we will wrap up this episode with 2 episodes of View with Vizard. In the first episode, Mike interviews Francois Lapeteau, Chief Product Officer for Edeseva, as Francois explains what makes backing up data stored in a software-as-a-service application so challenging. Then Mike will interview Groundcover CEO Shahar Azulay, as Shahar explains how the eBPF in the kernel of operating systems will be employed to transform application performance management in the Kubernetes era. And that's what we have coming up for you on this episode of Techstrong TV. So without further ado, let's get the show started. Enjoy.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
Hi again, everyone. Here are the headlines for October 25th. First up, Facebook has stated that they may ban news sharing in Canada based on legislation that is currently in the works. The legislation in question, the Online News Act, will require platforms like Facebook and Google to share revenue with publishers that they receive news from. The goal is to fairly compensate news outlets, but Meta has stated that publishers benefit from posting on their platform by allowing many more eyes to see the content. This story might sound like one you might have heard of already, as Australia introduced a similar law last year that ultimately resulted in Facebook turning off all news sharing before the law was reworked. As far as this story is concerned, though, we'll have to keep our eyes on it and see how it progresses. Next up, Texas is filing a lawsuit against Google on the basis of collecting biometric data from millions of Texans without proper consent. According to Texas, Google has collected and used biometric data for commercial ends in Google Photos, Google Assistant, and Nest Hub Max. Texas's law is prohibiting companies from collecting people's faces, voices, or other biometric data without informed consent. However, Google has said that these users have the option to turn it off and will fight this lawsuit in court. Zooming out, this is the most recent in a long line of privacy lawsuits filed against Google from states such as Arizona, Indiana, Washington State, and District of Columbia. Next, following Australia's Metabank breach, Australia has proposed several new penalties on companies that fail to protect customer data. The penalties for serious breaches would jump from $1.4 million to $32 million. Additionally, a company that could be fined for 30% of its revenues over a period of time if determined that the amount of the fine exceeded $32 million. The new changes are designed to make companies think more about cybersecurity and provide a meaningful reason to improve on it. Australia's parliament will resume this week, the first time since mid-September, and two of Australia's biggest cybersecurity breaches. In other news, the White House is reportedly in talks with Elon Musk about setting up SpaceX's Starlink to serve in Iran. The satellite-based broadband service could help Iranians avoid Iran's harsh restrictions on internet and social media access. The U.S. Treasury Department has stated that some satellite internet equipment can be exported to Iran, and Musk has since said that he would activate Starlink in response to the U.S. Secretary of State's goal to provide the free flow of information to Iranians. Zooming out, this development is due to the protests that have erupted in the country since last month. On Security Boulevard, we have an article looking at how the White House conducted a meeting to discuss the development of a security label for IoT devices. The label system, which was initially for routers and video cameras, will be made so that Americans can recognize which devices meet the highest cybersecurity standards to protect against hacking. The goal of the label system is to allow for Americans to identify secure tech to bring into their homes. To learn more, go to securityboulevard.com. On DevOps.com, we have an article looking at Cosmonic's unveiling of a PaaS environment for building cloud-native applications using WebAssembly. The Cosmonic PaaS will give developers access to a lightweight environment to quickly build applications. To learn more, go to DevOps.com. Finally, on Container Journal, we have an introduction to Cloud Custodian, a toolset that can manage and enforce cloud policies in a standardized format. The article gives example policies, the benefits of Cloud Custodian, as well as the future of Cloud Custodian. To learn more about this tool, go to containerjournal.com. And that's today's Techstrong News Recap.
Coding is changing the world, making a difference in the world.
We take anyone, any adult, and help them become the best version of themselves and become a software engineer.
At Techstrong Group, we've undertaken to meet this challenge with our Engineering the Change Scholarship.
My career has completely changed to now being sought after by some of the biggest tech companies in the world.
Full $10,000 scholarship to one winner to attend the intense software development course at Boca Code.
I was just ready to be a software engineer.
So, Donald is another story.
Right now it's kind of like, I don't know.
Honestly, starting to scare me a little bit.
Roller coaster of understanding something one moment and then feeling lost the next.
If you change the capitalization of a file name, you are going to your whole project.
At the end of it, you're gonna be a really good family.
We call Stephanie like the silent ninja. As much as he's struggling, Donald really, really wants this.
My house burned down twice.
The biggest thing I'm struggling with definitely is time.
That's pretty cool that I've been able to expand my mind to be able to accept different ways of doing something.
My only option is to succeed.
Boca Code, we do it!
High is definitely getting started. Lows would be Diary's jokes.
We told all of them that this is the hardest thing they would have to go through.
All of our graduates are absolute stars.
Boca Code!
Who will graduate and become a software engineer?
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm happy to be joined by, you know what, I've been interviewing him for a really long time, probably longer than I want to admit to, though he'll admit to it. I want to introduce you to my friend Deepak Giri. Darn it.
Giri Haka
Close.
I got the middle wrong. The middle syllables wrong.
I know. It's a spicy Scrabble score for sure. It's
no, Deepak helped me.
Giri, Dara, Gopal. So like
Giri, Dara, Popal.
Yeah, there you go.
Giri, Dara, Popal.
Yeah.
You know what it is over the years, Gary? Deepak, I can't read as well as I used to because it very much is pronounced the way it's written.
It is.
But
so
when we first started doing these, I used to be able to read your name from the monitor up there. Now it's a little fuzzy for me.
I know, right? Like
that means we've been doing this a long time.
Yeah, 10 years from now, we'll check in again and we'll finally get it. So
well, I'll probably have it in AI or something implanted in
That's
my brain.
true. It'll just be a deep fake of me actually delivering.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we won't even need to be around anymore. So
exactly.
We'll be chilling in the metaverse.
I hope so. Funny stuff. Anyway, all kidding aside, Deepak is CPO of Puppet, which is now Puppet by Perforce. He's been CTO there since what, 2011, Deepak?
Yeah, it's been a minute for sure. Yeah,
it's been a long time, and I always enjoy getting together with Deepak because he has a great kind of view of where he sits and what the world's like, and we're gonna talk about some of that today. But before we even jump into it, the first thing I wanted to kind of get out is that Puppet once again is conducting their annual State of DevOps survey, and this is sort of the granddad of DevOps surveys. I don't even know how many. Is it 12 years, 11 years?
Yeah, I think it's been, if not over a decade, closer to a decade than not, for sure. So,
So the survey, I think, just recently opened, maybe in the last week or so. For people who want to contribute to this year's survey, and I encourage all of you to do it, Deepak, where can they go?
Yeah, probably the easiest thing would just be if you just Google. I mean, it's kind of a known quantity at this point. If you literally just Google for State of DevOps report, you'll find it. There's also information about that on the Puppet blog. And then, if we want, we can supply the actual URL.
I have it in notes. We'll put it in the show notes here. But if you're watching this, if you go to puppet.com/blog, you'll see a blog article up there on the 2022 State of DevOps.
Yeah. So this one, every year we try to tackle a slightly different kind of thematic area in relation to DevOps. And the one that we're looking at this year is really around platform engineering. Sort of as an organizational concept, like how many people are doing it? Is that effective? Just tell us what your experiences are like, good, bad, ugly, all of that stuff. So yeah, just like in years past, we encourage everyone to fill out the survey. Like it's a great source of data. Like we're not the only company that uses it. Like, there's the research I think ends up being pretty formative for a lot of people's thesis on like new tools, new organizational structures, that kind of stuff. So, please fill it out
for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of my favorite things is seeing all the results come in, just because usually every year it actually shakes up some assumption I have about the industry. And there's so much kind of fashion and woo going on in the world of software in general. So it's nice to get some quantitative support one way or another. Right. So.
Absolutely. It's funny you mentioned platform engineering. I read an article. It was a sponsored article, not on our site.
Yep.
A couple weeks ago, DevOps is dead. Platform engineering is kind of taking its place. And
I read that one.
I wrote an op-ed to that. I'm so tired of hearing that kind of nonsense, right? First of all, technologies don't die, they evolve, right?
Yeah.
And platform engineering is cool. SRE is cool. DevOps is cool too. They all have their place in the universe of how we do things.
Yep.
And, it makes me take sort of, not that I'm old, but I'm old. And it makes me take sort of a historical view of this. Deepak, I think back, I published the first DevOps.com, I think March of 2014.
Yep.
At that time, Puppet, along with one or two other companies, they were DevOps, right? When you said DevOps to people, that's what people focused in on.
Yeah.
Right? And looking back on it now, though we called it DevOps, it really was much more ops than dev, I think, when we got to stuff with Puppet and configuration management and, deployment and stuff like that. And, the world's changed since 2014. as has Puppet as a result. And part of the world changes, the people, the labor force, and the skills required have changed. And we've seen the rise of things like the SRE. We've seen the rise of the platform engineer and platform engineering. Doesn't necessarily mean DevOps has died. It doesn't necessarily, what it means is, these things, they take on lives of their own, and they're pushed and pulled by market forces.
I'll throw it out at you.
No, I broadly, I would agree. I mean, I think, one of the points we've always tried to get across is that, DevOps is not exactly, people will quibble all day long. Like, what is the precise definition? It's not like Webster's has, a definition of this anywhere, like a lot of things in technology, right? Like, so I think initially, some stuff is evergreen, right? So I think the idea of having more of a shared set of interests and incentives that align a development team and a set of operators so that they could better come together to actually do what nominally I think they're paid to do, which is deliver a service that users like, that actually works and stays up, and no one loses any more sleep than is absolutely necessary to keep the stuff up and running. I think if you go back to like 2013, 2014, I think the reason why there was such centricity of tools in that conversation was really for a couple of reasons. I think number one, operations as a field had a lot to learn from the development ecosystem. Like a lot of us were working in environments where it's like, why can't operators, representing infrastructure as code was like a radical concept, for many people back then. What do you mean? Why would I do that? That's what devs do. And it's like, no, there's lessons there that make sense. Like revision control makes sense. Like peer review makes sense. Like all these practices we could inject. But that was never the goal. The goal was never to turn operators into developers. That's more a means to the end, where the end is, can we collaborate better so we're not considered these like two foreign entities that kind of look at each other with suspicion? Because that was really the state of how things were. So if I fast forward to now, I mean, obviously, is DevOps dead? I happen to have a pretty biased take on that, but I also think I'm right, which is, I don't think it is. I think it's absolutely every single company of any meaningful size that I talk to continues to have this discussion about how to kind of get a more efficient, more collaborative team going. Right? Like everybody still continues to deal with this. But I do agree there has been an evolution. The tool chain underneath has changed. The nature of infrastructure for a lot of companies has changed. What skills are available in the labor market has also changed, in some cases for the good, in some cases that complicates things, which is probably a set of questions unto itself we could get into. But I think it's never a bad idea to step back and reassess it. But, that's part of the reason why we wanted to do the survey on platform engineering is, there's definitely a lot of interest in that. But part of me says like, well, how are people actually implementing this stuff? And does it actually carry out or fulfill the promise of what we were trying to get at in aligning development and operations? And I guess we'll see when we actually get the quantitative data. But ultimately, I think the problems are still there. Like services still need to be maintained. People still need to be on call. Developers, by and large, still, I think many of them don't enjoy being on call. They don't want to be in an operations role. A lot of systems administrators or operators don't necessarily want to spend all their day learning 12 different JavaScript toolkits to like do hardcore development. Some of them do, and that's great. But I think as long as those preferences exist, we will have this kind of cultural divide, right? And I think a lot of the sound bites, I think, presume a lot of an organization's capability of doing what someone writes, in a blog post. Like if you just organize your teams in this way, it's all better. And I think in reality, what we've seen is there's really no one size fits all. It's really more of a conversation and a backdrop than it is a prescriptive set of methodologies,
Again, we've learned Deepak, you and I have been talking for years. We've learned we've learned so much and gotten wiser so much over the years around this whole issue that you're talking about, sort of what is DevOps and all of these things. And a couple of things. First of all, the world is such a complicated chaotic ball of mess sometimes, right? It would be so good if you were starting with a blank piece of paper always and said, okay, this is how I'm going to organize.
Yes.
Right, my devs and my ops and my this and my platform engineering and how I'm going to do things. And these are the people I'm going to hire in there.
Yeah.
And these are the That's a fiction. No one gets to,
It's
the
rare.
fact of the, it's beyond rare, right?
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is most of us work in brown messes of balls, right? Brown, not green fields, brown fields.
Brown field.
They're muddy brown fields. And there's technical debt. And there's people and personalities and cultures that we have to deal with that we just can't, snap our fingers or wiggle our nose and change their culture or their experience or their skills for that matter.
Oh, for sure.
Upskilling's hard.
It's tough. And I think you raise a really good point, which is that what works for, 3 people in a garage and, a Bay Area startup. Like I think about some of the startups that I advise, right? And usually one of the things I try to remind them is like, you don't have to do things in ways that scale, because you don't have a scale problem yet, right? And if anything, that's an advantage that a lot of these smaller, more nimbler startups have, right? And they need that to overcome all the other disadvantages they have of being a new business. But you're right, for most people that are in an established environment, like why does brownfield stuff even exist? It exists because there's technology in play that is actually doing stuff of value, right? If it wasn't valuable, just nuke it from orbit, right? Like the reason why it's still there and people have trepidation or they're at least cautious or methodical about how they want to deal with it is because it's usually fulfilling an extremely important purpose, right? Like it's the transaction clearinghouse for a stock exchange, right? Like why isn't this written in, the latest version of Golang or something like that? It's because, rewriting it puts potentially trillions of dollars worth of transactions every day at risk. Is that worth it? So I think the risk calculation is very different. So a lot of the models that we've seen that get a lot of hype, particularly from like Fang and, those types of companies, I don't know that they always translate to all these different, I'm not Netflix where I have basically one product more or less, and it's a web delivered product that can optimize things in a certain way. That it's great. Don't get me wrong. Like I'm not trying to minimize their accomplishments from an operational standpoint, but that playbook is not necessarily universally applicable, right? Across like all the different, the insanity that exists in like IT.
And that was one of the early, I think, lessons is, I don't want to be Google. I don't want to be Amazon. Yeah. I'm me. I'm not a unicorn. I'm not some Silicon Valley kind of crazy. It's just.
I think you've seen that in what I kind of lovingly call this trend sort of the let them eat cloud trend, which was like, look, the real way to basically emulate the efficiencies of what those companies are doing, even though I'm not like running a search engine where I'm basically printing money in my basement off of AdWords or whatever, right? But I'm an insurance company in the Midwest. Like, what I should really do is I should copy everything that they do. If we just move everything to the cloud, we'll be able to have like totally programmable infrastructure. And I think what's happened, and I think what the state of that is at this point, because I think it's very much an attitude of like, if we just let all of R&D just eat as much cloud as they want, like how big of an ops problem are we really going to have? Because the cloud takes care of a lot of that. When in reality, I think those of us that have been through at least one major trend and downfall, in infrastructure, like we know, like all of these things come with trade-offs. So I think now what you see is you have either a totally kind of a fragmented infrastructure setup inside of these IT departments where, everyone's deploying on the same cloud, but nothing looks the same. You have other things where you need to apply uniformity, like for auditing or security purposes. Like, how do you do that when everything is fragmented and you've kind of empowered all these individual teams in isolation? How do you hire people that have the skills to not only architect a new system, architect it in the cloud, have an awareness of like distributed systems and cloud native infrastructure? Like, you're kind of looking for an extremely rare combination of skill sets. And if you're Google, or you're Apple or something like that, sure, you can afford to pay an extremely high salary for, those SREs. But if you're, in middle America or something like that, where cost of living is radically different, the labor market's different, like you don't necessarily get to do that same, you can't apply that same solution. You maybe can't afford it. And even if you could, maybe it's not a wise investment relative to other stuff that you can do. So I think you still have this exact same problem, which is like, now it's great that there's better infrastructure primitives out there, but they're complicated in their own ways. So you still end up with, I think, a lot of the same problems we had in 2013, 2014. It's just moved around a little. I think the complexity has just moved around. I don't know that it's in absolute terms come down all that much, which is a little disappointing.
You're talking about a very fundamental kind of law of physics. There's two kinds of people in the world, right? One kind of person thinks as the universe continues to evolve, it becomes more complex. The other camp says as the universe evolves, it becomes less complex, right? It gets simpler.
Yeah.
I'm from the more complex world, right? I think we've built things and we could do more, but we didn't, while some things may have been simplified, they give rise to other complexities. And
100%. Like I think about the, I gave a talk.
Thermodynamics in here somewhere.
No. It's entropy, right? Is kind of one way I think about it, and you even see that in the lingo. Like a lot of ops folks, or myself included, will talk about like anti-fragile, anti-entropy systems. Control loops, which are anti-entropy. Like the whole reason that those exist is they're based on this assumption that, like, look, chaos is probably inevitable. Like left to its own devices, this stuff will kind of rot.
The natural state of things.
Even if it doesn't quite make sense why it is, like eventually it will. It's more likely than not, or at least it's likely enough. You have to think about it ahead of time. But like, I gave this talk a while back on like, where was the origin of config? I was kind of curious, like, what's the origin of managing configuration, right? Like, okay, it's Puppet, we do configuration management, orchestration. Like, when did that start? And like, one of the earliest references I could find was from a US military, like Department of Defense, like manual, like a training manual. And it was for people operating the control panels for missile silos. And it talked about the importance of understanding and logging the configuration of every switch on that panel. Anytime you made a change, you had to be meticulous about it. Why? Because chaos can happen. And someone leaves a switch up when it should be down. Someone didn't write down why somebody did this. And the one thing you don't want to do is accidentally launch a missile, right? But I think about it now, probably the one thing you don't want to do is accidentally take down a stock exchange or accidentally, take down the health insurance websites or things like that. Like it's equally important. But what has really changed? We still have those problems today. The technology has shifted underneath, like the advent of, I don't know, RPMs or devs as packaging. It's like, did that eliminate the need to understand the operability of a system? And did that eliminate systems administration? No. Did the advent of virtual machines eliminate that? No. One could argue it made it more important because now you can have more things.
I'll go even more basic.
Deepak, did the advent of DevOps and SRE and platform engineering and every continuous testing and continuous delivery, did it eliminate any jobs? Absolutely not. It created more jobs.
It created a lot, because I think there's the people out there that view this is maybe interesting given the general economic climate, I will say, and why I don't look at the stock prices of anything anymore, because it just depresses me. But like, there's an element of, automation is the refuge for these companies that basically want to like reduce their headcount. And I think about this and I'm like, even though the tools have become way more advanced, it's not that. I still think, like I've always thought, it's really unwise to think about the tooling is advanced now. So I could turn my operators, my sysadmins, my SREs, I could basically think of them as Roombas. If I just had sufficiently advanced tools, I could just
don't say that. Yeah, don't say that out loud. We'll get in trouble.
I could turn them into automated things,
right?
An automated
vacuum. Them a lot more efficient by
and instead I view it. I always thought that was short sighted, because I think the real the real move, the real strategic move, is not to look at them as like I could turn you into a robot or replace you with a robot, but instead think about it like I can build you an Iron Man suit. I amplify what you can do.
And we're out of time, so I'm not going to be. We're going to have you back on. But I think a lesson we've learned through all of this is don't underestimate the innovativeness and resiliency of humans.
Oh, yeah.
And given better tools and given, more resources, they come up with crazy stuff.
Oh, for sure.
Works.
I'll end with, because we're out of time, I'll end with I truly believe that complexity kind of expands to fill up how much space you give it. So as the tools get better and they let you do fancier things, what happens is people aren't like, oh, now I can simplify everything and do less in less time with less expense. Now people just do more and a larger scale quicker. And,
kind of like the story of my hard drives. Anyway, back.
I need to get you back on because I wanted to talk about labor forces and stuff. We never even got to that, as usual.
That's true.
But you know what? We do this 3 days a week. We always
happy
have
to come
time,
back
man.
on.
Let's get you rescheduled, and we'll continue the conversation.
Yeah, 100%.
For now, though, I want to leave the audience. Hey, go take the Puppet survey, please. It's at puppet.com. Go to puppet.com blog.
Yep.
Check out the article with the link. Go take this survey. You'll help yourself and the whole industry, as you always do with this. Deepak, my friend, it was great seeing you. I'll have you on soon. We'll continue.
Fantastic. All right. Good seeing you as always, Alan.
All right. This is Alan Schimmel. We're going to take a break here on Techstrong. We'll be right back.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another Techstrong TV episode. I am happy to be joined by Ryan Kachova. He's with a company called Jellyfish. You may be thinking, Jellyfish, I think I've heard of them. Hopefully you have. We had Andrew from Jellyfish on, I guess it was maybe a week or two ago, and kind of introduced, I think it was the first time we've had someone from Jellyfish on Techstrong TV. But if you missed that one or you're not sure, Ryan, first of all, welcome. Second of all, tell us about Jellyfish.
Yeah, Alan, first off, thanks for having me. Excited to be on today and diving a little bit deeper with you today. A little bit about Jellyfish. So Jellyfish, I guess I'll use an analogy to kick it off and say it succinctly here. Jellyfish is trying to do for engineering what Salesforce did for sales, right? What do we really mean by that? At the highest level, what we're trying to do is better surface business insights and better tie what the engineering organization is doing to what the broader organization is looking to achieve to make sure there's better synergy between all functions across software companies and really any company that has a software development team inside of it to ensure everybody's walking lock in step. What we're doing with that is essentially we're setting the top tools that engineers are already using day to day to help surface these insights without any changes required from the engineers.
Got it. So Ryan, that sounds great. And I think most of our audience kind of gets that. And at a high level, it is. But, when we get down to it, I mean, it's a SaaS-based offering that really allows the development/engineering teams. And in today's world, right, that includes DevOps and SREs and platform engineers and traditional developers, testers, all of these folks, to kind of have that, again, staying with the Salesforce thing, that relationship management type of interface, place where they, are syncing. Why don't we talk a little bit about what's your role at Jellyfish and a little of your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So my role at Jellyfish is the head of customer strategy. My background that got me here is essentially, it's a little bit unique. And I think some of my friends even say it was kind of tailor-made to end up at Jellyfish. It's a 50-50 split, balancing between various consulting and operating roles. I cut my teeth technically at Accenture, doing things like bytecode instrumentation, performance diagnostics. Eventually ended up getting the startup bug, bounced around a few different Boston-based startups before making my second foray back into consulting, where I joined a boutique strategy consulting firm where we were focused on this intersection between software development and business itself, right? And really, founding doctrine was around Mark Andreessen's software is eating the world, right? And this concept where there's a lot of complexity inside of the engineering world, right? It's been a black box to a lot of the functional elements of a business. So how do you, one, better communicate the engineering side to the business? But second, inside of the umbrella that's R&D, and we'll classify it today as both engineering and product, how do you help them run more effectively? And I really love that role. And we ended up growing fast and getting acquired to form EY Parthenon Software Strategy Group. And then a few years later, I decided to jump back into the startup world. And to be transparent, I didn't want to leave that realm. And I was doing some research into the space and stumbled upon Jellyfish and realized they're taking such a unique approach to this that's so different than others that have taken a foray into this, where it's not productivity, it's not just measuring lines of code, right? Instead, we're trying to quantify effort, understand the impact, as well as provide context around where engineers are spending their time day to day. And so my role here is really to help drive value, right? So I work with our customers, both pre and post sales, to help them understand how can you leverage Jellyfish to best operationalize your R&D teams, as well as help better communicate and ensure that a business as a whole is running more effectively. And so our team here essentially is value drivers, partnering closely with our customers, sharing how others are leveraging those insights, things of that nature, to help them take these unique insights they may not have even seen before and help action changes inside of their organizations.
Got it. Excellent, man. You're right. You are uniquely positioned for this role, right? With the experience. And, I mentor a lot of young people. When you're my age, everyone's young. But, I tell people, you can't just go to school thinking this is what you're going to be. The world is such a dynamic place, the workplace, the technologies we use. You got to be, no pun intended, agile and nimble, right? And find those kinds of solutions that, A, make you happy, right? Kind of like what you like to do, but also B, that take your unique skills, but also give you a chance to stretch. Right? No one wants to be doing the same job, same task over and over again. Anyway, excellent, man. Thank you for that background. Excuse me. Ryan, just a couple days ago, Jellyfish announced a big new offering, and I wanted to ask you to kind of share it with our audience a little bit.
We are. And what is now live is this newer module. We're referring to it as DevFinOps. What the heck is DevFinOps? It's an emerging space, is how we think about it. And maybe to answer that, I'll step back just a little bit, right? When you think about all things development, right? And I keep using this phrase of it's a black box, right? People have yet to have insights into it. Engineering has been a little bit of a side appendage as opposed to integrated across an organization. And an analogy I like is thinking about DevSecOps, right? Where you start integrating security earlier into a software development lifecycle with the idea of increasing the communication, the collaboration between the operations teams and the development teams. Very similarly, if you think about this, what has eventually been a contentious relationship between finance and engineering, right? We're now trying to introduce that and break down some of those walls, essentially bridge that gap between finance and engineering. So DevFinOps is essentially all things financially related around what engineers are doing day to day, right? From an engineer's perspective, they're also saying, hey, we need a few more headcount so that we're able to go off and actually tackle this, refactoring initiative, or spend a little bit more time on technical debt. And hey, we also need to cut down on some of our support costs, right? How do we surface that in a way that finance teams understand our true capacity and where we're actually spending our time? And alternatively, finance teams need core information from engineers to be able to actually execute their job, right? Whether that be trying to understand unit economics or be working to understand cost capitalization or other workflows along those lines, right? How do we better surface these types of insights, these key pieces of data that enable financial teams to do their job without essentially pulling engineers and engineering leaders off the line to run spreadsheet analytics and go back and forth trying to understand the why or the what or the how much, right? let's surface all of that so we can make those right decisions and also free up more time for doing people's core jobs, which on the engineering side is delivering software, and on the financial side, right, it's making the right decisions and positioning the company for success from a financial perspective.
I love it. Look, our first of all, our audience is technical, right? Secondly, we've heard of FinOps, and I think FinOps is something that has gained a lot. Certainly since the FinOps Foundation is part of Linux Foundation started, it's gone. I don't know if it's quite gone mainstream, but it's gone pretty, well known. Dev FinOps here, right, is an evolution, if you will, of FinOps, and I think you and Jellyfish and the like, you guys are going to have to sort of be missionaries around this. Let's talk about how do you go to market with this kind of thing, Ryan?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I actually want to step back even just a little bit, knowing that our crowd is more technical, as you suggested, right? Mm-hmm. And speak a little bit around like some of the workflows they might be familiar with, right? Mm-hmm. One of them, and people have probably heard of this, is this idea of like R&D cost capitalization. Similarly, there's things like R&D tax credits, right? Yep. These are often the more painstaking elements, some of the biggest pain points where you have to have the most granular data. And so there's also a decent amount of friction between finance and engineering as part of that. Yep. What these workflows really are, just to step back a little bit, is they're essentially this idea of providing inputs to where engineers are spending their time, such that finance teams can interpret that data in different ways and treat it differently inside of their balance sheet, their income statements, and things of that nature. We can go into more detail in just a bit on those if it's helpful. But when we go to market, right, it's actually a unique synergy. And that is that when you talk to engineering leaders, like we already do with our core engineering management platform, which is, hey, how do we help your team become most effective, right? How do we help you deliver that software on time? And one of the pain points that keeps coming up is that they want more time, right? They want more time to work with their teams. They want more time to remove the noise and allow more flow time for the engineers, but also the leaders themselves. And they also want to make case for more headcount. Hey, we need more headcount to do X, or set better expectations around what's actually doable with the team that we have today, and also where our technology architecture sits, right? We might need to do a refactoring in order to achieve the next goal. And so it's a unique and actually really good corollary or intersection of the two, where they often start saying, hey, the pain points here is, wow, if I have visibility into where we're spending our time, could I use this to also take this large set of work that's on our plate and put it to the side and automate it, right? And on the finance teams, we're also hearing similar, hey, I just want visibility, not because I want to see everything they're doing, but I do need to do these core sets for our job. And so combining the two together when we go to market, it's actually just selling a great value proposition on both ends. The ability to help automate these workflows and these challenges that these teams are facing day to day, and freeing up a lot of time across both of them, and getting them better fidelity of data as well than when they're doing that.
Love it. Excellent stuff. You were talking about R&D tax credits, and I can testify personally what a pain that is. Trying to figure out, right, go back to your engineers after the fact and say, well, how much time did you allocate on this thing? Whereas, yeah, it was a road to nowhere. But so this sounds like a great thing. Right, just in terms of an offering, is a standalone separate offering from the main Jellyfish platform, or an add-on, or how's that kind of sliced and diced, if you will?
Yeah, excellent question. So Dev FinOps as a module as part of our core platform leverages the same capabilities that already exist in our platform, right? What that means essentially is that Jellyfish as an engineering management platform is already passively sitting atop the tools that engineers are using day to day, right? In doing so, we're already able to quantify engineering effort and categorize that for a plethora of use cases that are part of our core platform. We now offer DevFinOps inside of our application and as a separate module that can be leveraged by both engineering leaders as well as finance leaders as part of that core platform, as well as a standalone capability, should that be the ask of the customer as well.
I love it. Hey, we're kind of wrapping up here, but for people who want to get more information on this, where do they go, Ryan?
Yeah, great question. You can go to our website, jellyfish.co. You can also go to LinkedIn. Pretty easy to find there. Ryan Kuchova, Kuchova. Happy to answer any questions that might come across.
All right. Hey, Ryan, I want to thank you for your first appearance here on Techstrong TV. Come back and see us again soon, I hope. Until then, be well up there in Boston, and we'll be in touch.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having us. Hopefully connect soon.
All right. Hey, just a quick reminder. It's jellyfish.co, not C-O-M. Jellyfish.co, C-O.
.co, that is correct.
We're going to take a break here on Techstrong. We'll be back in a moment. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another DevOps Unbound. For those of you who are not familiar, DevOps Unbound is a semi-weekly show where we delve into different areas of DevOps. We like to explore all the nooks and crannies around DevOps, and DevOps is a pretty big area today, so there's a lot of nooks and crannies. We do this show, as I said, every other week, and then about once a month, for those who are interested, we do a live version with a live audience of this show where we let you, the audience, kind of drive the discussion via chat and so forth. Today's episode, though, is not with a live audience, but we are blessed to have an amazing panel of folks here with us. And I'm going to introduce them here in just 1 second. I want to just, first of all, throw a big shout out to our friends at Tricentis, though. Tricentis has sponsored DevOps Unbound for going on 2 years now. And couldn't ask for a better partner and a better sponsor to work with. Always happy to be doing work with them, and many thanks to them. Also, today's show is entitled Debunking the Myth of Shift-Right Testing. And we're going to jump all into that. But first, let me introduce you to what I think is, I said, a really, really great panel. I'm going to start off with Shameen Ahmed. I tried, and then, of course, when I said it, I got tongue twisted. Shameen, welcome. Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Thank you, Alan. Shameen Ahmed, CTO for DevOps Solutions at Broadcom. I'm responsible for strategic innovations in our products. I also act as a trusted advisor for many of our key clients as they navigate the DevOps transformation journeys. Very passionate about shifting right on test. So we'll talk about that.
Absolutely, and thank you, Shameen. I appreciate it. Next, I want to introduce you to actually, he's not old, but he's an old friend of mine, and I'm thrilled to have him on the show here. It's been too long since I've had a chance to have my friend Chris Riley here. Chris, go ahead.
Appreciate that. And I have a beard now, by the way, since last time we chatted. Name is Chris Riley. I am a senior manager of developer relations at HubSpot. I really lead our advocacy team. Been in the DevOps space for a long time, and I'm obsessed with the idea of optimizing delivery chains and visibility. So excited to be able to talk about this.
Excellent. Next up, I want to introduce a repeat guest on our show. I enjoyed the heck out of having him on. He's a great guy, Paul Bruce. Paul, welcome. If you want to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Alan. My name is Paul. I'm head of incubation at Tricentis. I get to work on some really cool stuff, work with some really cool people, get to learn about our organization on a day-to-day basis, and hopefully produce some really great inventions into the industry. I also am community organizer of the DevOps Days Boston, one of the core organizers there, Boston DevOps Meetup, the Slack group, I run OliFests every year, hopefully next year as well, and really just care a lot about engineers having an easy time of things, but also learning and improving themselves and those around them. So I get to do that as a full-time job and as volunteer as well. And I'm really great to be on here. Looking forward to maybe seeing you at KubeCon as well in Detroit.
Absolutely. Well, you'll see us there. We're broadcasting live. All right. Our final panel member is kind of a special guest star for this panel. It's her first time here, but we are thrilled to have her, and it's the one and only Nora Jones. Hi, Nora. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, super happy to be here. I'm Nora. I'm the founder and CEO of Jelly. Jelly is an incident management platform that particularly helps focus on the human aspect of incidents and understanding what led to incidents and surfacing patterns and ways that you can use to improve yourselves in the future. I have a big background in testing and production. I have been in reliability my whole career, and I've spent a lot of time with chaos engineering. My thinking's evolved a lot since I first started doing some of those things, and I have a lot of thoughts on testing and production. So I'm really happy to be here and share with y'all.
Thank you, Nora. Last but not least, he's not really a member of the panel. He's my co-host and partner and friend, Mitch Ashley. Mitch, why don't you introduce yourself?
As always, great to be with the panel. Mitch Ashley, CTO at Techstrong Group and principal with Techstrong Research. I too have also been doing testing and production. Most of the time it was due to very tight product deadlines, not due intentions, but no, we're talking about a new kind of testing and production.
Yep. Thanks for joining us, Mitchell. All right, team. As I mentioned, the title of today's episode is Debunking the Myths of Shift Right Testing. Man, if I had a nickel for every time I've used the word shift left over the last 8 years, I wouldn't be here doing this show. I'd be out on my boat in some South Pacific island. But here I am. I didn't get a nickel for every time I had shift left, but shift left has become almost synonymous with DevOps. Whether we're talking about shift left in security or shift left in testing, just shifting left in the whole software development lifecycle has become commonplace and part of what we do when we talk about DevOps. However, maybe, 2 years ago, we started hearing about, when we're shifting left, we got to remember about shifting right. And I heard this initially with security. Then I started hearing it with testing, and I'm like, what the heck is shift right testing? Oh, wait a second, it's testing in production. You mean the way we used to do it? And that's kind of my feeling on it. But is that just the way we used to do it, or is shift right testing a new animal altogether? I think we got to define it before we start debunking the myths of it. So, you know what? Paul, I'm going to ask you to kick it off. And then, panel, feel free to jump from there. Paul, what do we mean?
Well, I think there are some paradigms that survive transition. And when I say transition, I also refer to the standards-based version of the notion of transition, the transition process. I'm not just talking about like the old monocles of like a staging environment or no staging environment or whatnot, but like the fact is, some paired to like, how are you gonna ask an insurance company to run their big fat load test with all their datas in a production environment, or even just e-commerce, right? Like now all of a sudden you got to go over to your sales ops person and say, oh, these records are completely bunk and these ones are real customers. No. That's what happens when you just port a paradigm and assume that it's going to work perfectly in another place. What we see, and actually we were down on, Alan, you and I think saw each other in the hallway in Hotel Day in Austin, right? The open source summit in Austin in what? Mm-hmm. Oh gosh, a million years ago. Was it April, May? I don't know. June, whatever.
I think it might have been August, but it's okay.
It's something like that, right? Like It was a million miles away. But like at that conference, one of the things that they were really very interested in terms of open telemetry was also to be able to, for some companies like Trace Test, Ken over at Trace Test, and then also who was it? it was Michael Haberman and Aron Grabner that run Aspecto, right? These are premises that say, hold on, this is not testing in production, it's just testing production. Production should emit useful information to make business decisions that, by the way, should also be part of your pre-prod, pre-roll release process. Your system should be producing information enough where you could easily just go, based on the exhaust data of our systems, is it working enough, well enough or not? So this notion of like testing in production almost puts it like as if you take testing from the old days and just port it to production, as if you can do the same things. The different things is actually saying, hey, look, systems changed, highly distributed, lots of information coming out of them. Why wouldn't that be the evidence-based proof that things transitioned properly? And I think that's a really cool thing. On the other hand, there's plenty of people who still need to prove confidence before they release, because they might not have these perfect sort of canary, like, 1% or progressive rollout processes, don't have the luxury of that, have to go, I don't know, 1-1 testing is a big thing in insurance. Same thing, open enrollment just happened at Tricentis. The people that support us, right, our healthcare provider, had to be ready months in advance before rolling it out to even a small portion of their requirements and for compliance. So whatever parts of the spectrum you're on, you do your stuff beforehand, but like afterwards, that shift right is the question of what feedback from your systems is absolutely necessary, no matter which environment you're in.
Fair. Nora, you are someone with a ton of testing in production. Paul gave us a lot of kind of what we're seeing, what's new in there. But I'm going to ask you to, pin the tail on the donkey. Is shift right testing just testing in production, or is it testing production, as Paul's alluded to? What do you think it is?
I can't stop thinking about a T-shirt that Charity Majors made, which says, "I test in production, and so do you." It doesn't feel that controversial to me, because the thing is, we're all doing it, and it's about like your mindset towards it. Like, are you accepting and embracing that you are already doing testing in production, or are you scared of it and making things in place, trying to make your staging environment perfect, or trying to really emulate the load of some things? I mean, like what Paul was saying, some folks just don't have the luxury of doing some of that. And so I think you need to work on, I think orgs just in general need to work on making production feel comfortable to test in a lot of different ways. And there's a lot of ways to do that with tooling, with organizational mindsets, with a bunch of different things. So, that's generally like where my head is at for this talk.
Actually, I really like how you put comfortable. I do think a lot of it is mindset, and I think everybody's kind of starting at a different spot. I actually think it's kind of unfortunate we say left and right, because it sounds very waterfall to me. And I don't know, 7 years ago, like the term continuous testing almost stuck for a bit, and then it's kind of come back. But from my perspective is, you should think about quality and security no matter where the code is. It doesn't matter at the point of feature definition. So production is just one of those places, and creating these artificial gates mentally, I think in the teams is a big part of the problem, because sometimes it seems overwhelming. I know when I talk to companies and they'll say, well, I can't just like port it over. They haven't even figured out feature flags. Like, they haven't even figured out good functional testing. They haven't even figured out good unit testing. Like, there's some basics that have to happen first. So we shouldn't just assume like everybody has those basics and they can just do it across all environments. But we should assume that everybody is thinking about security and quality throughout the entire pipeline.
It's fair. It's fair. Shaman, pronounce it for me one more time. Shaman, look, should we have a stigma around, so-called shift right testing or testing in production? Is there a stigma that's grown up? Because I'll be really honest with you, it wasn't unusual. Mitchell and I built products 25 years ago, and we never finished our testing in time, right? We never did, or on budget either. I always blamed him. But, you know, we used to continue testing in production even after we released. Did we forget that, or have we buried it up in the attic with grandma's clothes or something? Right? When did that become such an evil thing?
I don't know, Alan. I don't think there should be a stigma. Like Nora says, we've been doing this. We all do it. And I think maybe some of the pushback came from more risk-averse organizations like the banking and the financial services people who feel that they just can't afford to experiment with their live systems because it had implications, right? Beyond systems that they could control, because these are very interconnected systems, the regulatory challenges as well. But even then, I know that many of these financial services customers or enterprises do shift drive testing, right? I mean, we actually run a survey with Capgemini a couple of years ago, and that clearly showed about 45% of enterprises are actually doing shift right testing. But also more importantly, I think as Paul mentioned, the key thing for us is being able to gather insights from production data and feeding it back to the previous parts of the lifecycle. That essentially is what continuous testing is, because the moment you say you're doing continuous testing, it means that you're testing across the entire lifecycle, be it pre-production and post-production, right? So I think that's been a big focus for us as well as our customers. For example, we've been doing, for example, crowd testing forever. That's a key part of, for example, CX focused testing, customer experience focused testing, right? I mean, I believe that you really can't do a whole bunch of CX. You can shift left, but I think most of your best CX testing is done in production. And got to remember, CX testing is very, very different than the traditional testing we do, right? I mean, if you think about CX, the feedback is in shades of gray, right? You don't have a pass or a fail necessarily. Oh yeah, I kind of like that. I don't necessarily like this, so it's very, very different, right? So the whole approach to some of the concepts around customer experience focused testing is different than the way we look at traditional testing, right? And also completely agree with Chris. For example, when you have things in production, your users are giving you real feedback in terms of what they like, what they don't like, what they see with their competitors, for example. That's a great way for you to do requirements validation, right? What should be part of my requirements suite? Is it only the product owner who gives me requirements, or is there insights that I can gather from production in terms of what do my users really want? What are they adopting? What are they not adopting, right? What do they like? What do they see with my competitors that they would like to see in my product? All of those insights are really part of the very shift left, right? I mean, requirements definition. So I see this as a continuous process. I think one of the key things that we're beginning to see, Alan, more and more is around the generation of insights from production data, right? Not only do we need that, for example, for disciplines like test data management, right? You need to have realistic data from production, right? But if you think about more and more of our AI-based applications, they need to be continuously refreshed with data so that the model can be rebuilt or recalibrated, right? The machine learning models, and that requires you to have those insights from the data from raw data from production as well. Also, for example, we're building our solution around how do we predict reliability, right? So if you look at the latest DORA report that came out just last week, I believe, right? You will see that the change failure rate has actually gone up from 2020-21. Before that, even low maturity organizations had change failure rates of around, maybe, I think the range was 15 to 30%. Now it has gone up from 30 to 60%, and 80% of all of the enterprises that they surveyed have change failure rates greater than 16%, which is very high, which means that while our enterprises are going for high velocity, deploying more often, but at the same time, they have a significant number of deployments going to production that fail, right? So would it not be better if we actually gathered insights from production and fed that insights back into a pre-production environment so we can start to get a better feel for what kinds of deployments fail, right? Can we gather insights? Can we embed the data from production along with the pre-production data and get to a better decision support system for our guys so that you can actually start to actively predict and manage your change failure rate, for example.
Absolutely.
Alan, I was thinking about the myths, sort of the title of our talk. There's some fundamental things that have evolved and changed over, since you and I were doing products together in the early 2000s. One is we have so much more automation. Two, we have a lot of data available to us that has created because of that automation. We are able to keep it now, both prior to it going into production or in test or in the development cycle. And the other is just faster delivery of software. Now, most of us aren't at the stage like a Netflix to be able to deliver multiple deploys a day, but our ability to experiment and market, or if we do have a problem in software that we need to resolve, we can fairly quickly. We're not waiting for the next quarterly or 6-month release, right? Not everybody is there, I understand that, but we are in a bit of a different world. And those are some of the kind of fundamentals that have changed to allow us to look at testing in a whole life cycle of software, not just before it hits production.
Fair. Anyone else on the panel? Thoughts? Let me go ahead.
I just quickly wanted to say, I am curious, like they don't seem at odds with each other to me. Like it seems like a loop in a way.
Yeah.
Like, and so when you are,
it's not an either or, sure.
How do you bake that? How are you taking that and baking that back in over here and consistently doing it without having it be a problem? I mean, my very first internship ever, I was a QA engineer, and the way that the process worked, it was at a hardware company. Every time the hardware didn't work as expected, a new test case would be added to this spreadsheet. And this spreadsheet couldn't even open on your machine at one point. It was just so big. And that's not the way to do it, right? It's like, how did this thing even happen? Why was it possible for this to happen? What trade-offs were people thinking about? How are we actually vocalizing all those trade-offs people are thinking about over time and putting that in our shift left, rather than just adding an additional run book or adding an additional test case? And I know the example I brought up feels quite antiquated, but it's also still happening all the time. Like when I see a postmortem where the action items are update the run book, I want to pull my hair out, because you can say that about any incident. You can say that about any bad thing that happened. It's more, how are we exposing the conversation around how this thing happened and baking that into just our everyday assumptions, our everyday collaborations with each other?
Yeah. Alan, the last time I was on, I think it was with Tammy from that was working at Gremlin. And, we were talking in and around this problem of what happens when there's a problem. Well, whether you use Gremlin, we use in many of our large enterprise customers, they'll use both combination of Neoload and Gremlin in a pipeline to kind of parallel, inject fault to prove that the resilience they know has to be there is there, but you're never going to prove all the things are perfect. And that's not the point. Yeah. On the other hand, you do have to start in a place where you are not literally shooting yourself in the foot. So though I hope and I love the idea that people should be treating their production systems as not just an organism, which it is, but also the living embodiment of their organizations, right? That fundamentally, I think, Nora, you brought up the notion of the lessons we learn. And one of the things that I think we talked about, Tammy and I did, was this notion of almost like a write once and read never culture, where it's oh yeah, we got to do a retro. And then either it's so biased for action that everything has to turn into a suggested action that turns into a task, or people ignore it and it becomes a problem over and over again. So, one of the things I wonder about is how do we turn what normally is sort of Chris, you mentioned the shift left and right, still feeling waterfall. Don't worry, I've trademarked the term. Let me make sure I say this right. Bullshift. Right? It's about feedback being right fit at the right times, at the right places, and also making sure that instead of like a flat paper, it's a cylinder. It always comes back around, right? Your posteriori knowledge, a posteriori knowledge can become a priori knowledge, but only for people who are paying attention to it and prioritizing what knowledge has to be in place to make a good enough informed decision. And that's a tricky place to be. So like, we're doing some things in Tricentis Drive, figure out, change impact analysis. We've got that live compare tool that does it for SAP, which quite frankly is a very baked, concrete sort of, transaction codes are over here like they are over there. And it's a very well-known system, very well-known domain model, even with all their changes over the past couple of years. But what does that mean for things like custom apps? How do you map out the domain of things that like the change stream, the domain model, and the usage data across things that like I can brain fart out a Node.js plus like Angular front end app and have it hit millions of users in a matter of months? How do I define those things for any given application that an enterprise might commit 3 to 6 months on? So the question is, how do we actually prioritize that knowledge that we have at the right times, at the right places? And I think Nora, Jelly.io, what little I know about Jelly.io, but like what I see and what I've heard and watched some videos on, it seems like you're taking a particular pain point and turning it into, what do we learn? This is an opportunity for learning. And I love that, right? Like that's at the heart of, I love that. So my question back to the group, and unless Alan, you want to take it in a different direction, is like, what do we do in these moments to figure out how to take like a moment of problem? Let's say we test in production and there is, oops, we caused ourselves an incident. Don't worry, you also already probably have plenty of incidents to deal with, but regardless of where the incident comes from, what are some dynamics that go into making sure that we've prioritized the outcomes, that we've actually thought about, should we take action on this, and how do we do that? I don't know where else to start with this group.
Can I quickly just jump in real quick? Because something you said, Paul, was just absolute gold. It's, we're talking a lot about learning, but I think people in organizations learn in very different ways. You said something about write once, read never, right? Maybe your organization just doesn't like documentation, and you kind of have to lean into that, right? Like, how does our org learn? What do people receive well in our org? How does change get made? Because that's how you have to tailor your learning. Like, that's how you have to tailor disseminating your lessons learned and disseminating those philosophies. Like, you could write all day about the change log of a thing and how it, gets looked at. But if no one is clicking on that and internalizing it and making time to internalize that, does it matter? Yeah. When I joined the chaos team at Netflix, I was so excited to join it. And we were working on this really great tool that they had already written some white papers about, like, wow, we can inject failure in production without a customer noticing. Like, that's so cool. And yet I looked at the application, and the only people using our tooling were the 3 members of my team. And so I'm like, we're learning all this stuff about our system, but it's staying with us, people that are not on call for the system. And so it opened up a big conversation around, how do we get other people enrolled in this? How do we do testing and lessons learned and experimentation in a way that gets people to learn about what's happening and also share those stories with each other? I didn't want to step on your question for the group.
That's great.
I think you still addressed it. I would say that I was thinking, Paul, as you were talking, like, there's other symptoms of the problem in organizations. For example, like documentation certainly is that, right once, read never. But also people who think in terms of like change management and change controls and all of that stuff have a tendency not to think about things in a very fluid way. But how do we get there? Like, and it feels weird because DevOps has actually been around for a while now. It's been around for a bit, but every single conversation I'm talking about silos and culture. And like, I think as as thought leaders in the industry, we're still not serving the folks who haven't gotten some of the basics down. Like, to me, one of the things I'm still super shocked about is pipeline analytics is not in every single practice out there. And like, how can you think in terms of resilience if you don't even have the data to measure like how you're doing? Like, if you don't even have that information, like, you're not even at the point where you can start considering doing more. So I would encourage anybody listening is like, if you don't have the basics and you don't have the culture, make sure you get that right. Like, your North Star can be testing across everything, but like, don't skip steps. Although my little boy is going to walk before he crawls, which that breaks every paradigm I've ever known. The other thing I'll say is that what's interesting is, you know, in the case of blue-green deploys or canary deployments, you could argue that failure is a success. So a failed deploy is exactly what you needed to make a decision to improve. And so it really, to me, is like, people need to get uncomfortable knowing that things will break no matter what, no matter how hard they try, that your users are your testers, that creating parity in any sort of pre-production environment is impossible. And so you need to really just think about quality everywhere, and not like an afterthought, or not like something that you just have to do, kind of like doing your homework or doing a chore.
Yep. So from a cultural perspective, Chris, I think one of the key things we're seeing is more and more enterprises adopt site reliability engineering and this new role of an SRE. So many times testers feel very uncomfortable with production data. I mean, in fact, I don't see many cases where testers actually have access to production data at all, right? Despite the growth of AI ops technologies where they can get snapshots and insights. But I think the SRE is one of those key roles we look at that bridges really the gap from an organization silos and roles and personas perspective, because they need to be working with all of these different groups, developers and specifically testers, and really bring them out of their shelter, so to speak, because many times we feel testers feeling somewhat isolated, right? So because they can help share in a more digestible form, some of the insights from production, what they're doing with error budgets. For example, how are they calculating their error budgets, right? A tester should definitely have an input into the whole process, because, who better than a tester to give insights in terms of what are the potential risks or untested pieces of the applications, right? So I think there needs to be some cultural bridges that need to be built with the help of the SRE roles and some of the other transformations that are going on to help developers, testers, and other roles like product owners and product managers to play a more continuous, role in the whole life cycle, as opposed to say, hey, I'm only in pre-production, the operations guys deal with production, and sort of break down those silos.
Yeah, I'm glad you said SRE. I think that was the first time we said it, in the most amazing practice I've ever been a part of, in terms of like a high-performing engineering team, leaned heavily on their SREs, and not like, I'm not meaning like overworking them. They weren't the fixers. They were the stewards. They were the stewards of quality. The only thing that they owned fully was the tools that were available and the what we call production readiness checklist, which included testing. And so it was more about guardrails and stewardship and communication than going in and being the ones who run a script to restart a server. And so, yeah, I think that functions of that sort are very important overall.
I think you both hit the nail on the head there. I so much of this is just about enrolling people that have different sharp ends and different areas of expertise into the conversation where things are created, and finding an opportunity to collaborate together. Like you said, I think, Chris, you were talking about some folks don't have some of the fundamentals down. but I guarantee you those folks are also still having incidents. And I'm curious how they are bringing in all the necessary people that were impacted by that. Like testers were impacted by that, engineers were impacted by that. I think a big group that we don't talk a lot about is marketing, right? Like we talk about load testing and production, and we talk about events like your open enrollment story, Paul, but we don't always talk to the end of the business that is really understanding those deadlines and the impact on folks. I mean, this is a kind of silly example, but I was really excited to watch the new Hocus Pocus with my nieces and nephews. And I noticed Disney Plus was pretty down for a couple of days on the date it was released. Right. And so I immediately, and I worked at a streaming company, but I was immediately curious about how some of those deadlines and expectations around user management were communicated internally, and how, and if marketing and content development was working with SREs and testers around this, or if SREs and testers were sitting in silos and just making assumptions without, like, hey, we have all this data we can look at, we can predict these numbers. And it's like, yeah, but you should also hear the stories from folks on these impacts too.
Well, there's two general phrases that come to mind. One is you're only as strong as your weakest link. And at least from my years of doing performance engineering and then moving out to reliability and scalability, and then figuring out, how to help a community of people that are regularly getting burned out just by dealing with the crap that their organizations throw into their production systems, which is in part a lot of DevOps work and a lot of SRE work. And we need to watch out for that, I say, for my local and global community of SREs and DevOps folks. But the weakest link thing is like, there are things that you can catch early on. Use the dinkiest tool and catch the dinkiest problems, and then use something else. And there are different types of testings. And when we talk about testing, I'm almost like so done with testing, working for a company that has a lot of great testing products. The fact is, it's like, it needs to be elevated beyond testing and needs to focus on quality engineering and what information people need at the table at the right times, the number of times that test engineers don't have access to APM tools, even for pre-production environments, no architectural diagrams, which by the way, always change, and you might as well go off to that APM tool and look at the actual service dependency tree. Like, the information that we need is beyond just write a test and run a test and pass fail bullcrap. So like the weakest link, you should catch a lot of your weak links before you actually bother with throwing actual revenue generating, or even if you're an NPO, large NPOs, some of the ones that we support, they end up having large, like, people's lives are affected by when their services are down, critical systems and stuff. So the weakest link thing, there's a lot of weak links that you can get out of the way. And then, yes, we should focus on things that just are so cost prohibitive to set up in staging environments and stuff like that. Absolutely. That stuff's going to happen. We need to be fast and learn about it, and have the second phrase that I would put is, if a tree falls in the woods, right? And then the follow-up is, and nobody's there to hear it, does it make a sense? In reality, if we don't have visibility, and I won't use the overloaded term now of observability to describe this, but if we don't have a comprehension of what are our most important things that we need to pay attention to in production, then backport those. That's where I think shift right actually plays a role. And I think, Shamim, you kind of pointed at this as taking production information and informing not only the testing approaches, but the dev approaches and the product and the, like, who's using it comes up all the time on calls for me. So if nobody's listening because there's not information, that's a big problem. So get the information in place, and the game of measurement is like, it's easy to measure the wrong things, but iterate on that stuff and make sure that there is a parity, especially between tech and biz, about what you're measuring in production. And why wouldn't you be measuring that when you are trying to figure out, your next major release has some significant changes that could very easily combine together to cause some big issues. New CPU types, plus a migration to Kafka plus something else, right? So I would say the two things are, first off, if you're not doing the obvious things, come on, there is a maturity factor. And Chris, you mentioned new people in the, like, people like, why do we have to keep bringing some things up? Because there's always new people. There's always people, like, it's something's always new to somebody. And so as new crops of people who are new to, not just software engineering, but DevOps and SRE, right, come into play, they don't know all the pains and the scars from people who've gone before. So I think to Nora's point, we kind of got to figure out how to create conversations that help people gain context in a personal way, as opposed to a write once, read never culture. Sorry, that was a diatribe.
So Bruce, widely agree with you. And I think I'm so glad you mentioned the word quality engineering, right? Because at the end of the day, it's about delivering quality, and quality is as perceived by the users of your system, right?
Yep.
And many times we find that we do testing for the sake of testing. We talk about test-driven development and everything. But at the end of the day, testing is an activity, quality is an outcome.
Right.
So quality should be driving the testing. In other words, what your customers or users perceive of your software, right, should really be driving the kind of testing you, or any kind of activity, right? It could be development or testing, whatever, right? It's not just about try to achieve test coverage or anything like that. For example, if you're a startup, good enough quality, right? So I think everything should be modulated based on the goal in production. In that sense, really, it's quality-driven testing, right? That's a key driver in my mind for this whole notion of shift right? Because that's really what our customers care about, right? So everything in testing should be driven by the end goal of quality, right?
Fair. You know what, though? I'm listening to you folks, and I don't pretend you guys know a lot more about testing than I do. But one thing that kind of resonates and comes home for me is, like so many other things in DevOps, the C word, culture, plays such a role here, right? I think sometimes we lose sight of the fact that failing a test isn't necessarily a terrible thing. I'd rather find out about that failure on my testing than when Nora's niece is crying bloody murder because she can't watch Hocus Pocus 2, right? Or when NFL Sunday Ticket goes out on me and I'm screaming, sitting there in my football jersey, cursing the NFL gods. But yeah, and that's the purpose of this testing a lot of times. And so culturally, we have to understand, don't sweep stuff under the rug. Let's, yes, do the low-hanging fruit, as Paul mentioned, but there's nothing the matter with doing as much testing as we can. Stitch in time saves 9, or whatever it says, and so we need to culturally make sure our culture is such. I mean, and it's come a long way. Think about where we are today with feature flags and A/B testing and all these things, right? That's all at some level production testing, right? I mean, Mitchell, you and I, we had Paul Pickney, our UI developer. He used to have to do all the UI development and kind of interviews with people before we put the software out. Then first find out when people were kind of bitching and moaning about mistakes we made in that. So I think that's an important piece of it, and to the point where, look, change is constant in our business. There's always new people, new ideas, people who need to learn. You've got to kind of build that into your culture as well. Anyway, we are approaching the top of the hour here. Before Mitchell, I'm going to give you the last word, but I'm going to give you a minute to think about it. I want to thank Shameen, Paul, Nora, Chris. What a great conversation. We're going to rerun this one again. And, I'll leave it to the producers here to fix that for us. But I'd love to continue this conversation. To all of those at home, thank you for joining in. Many thanks to Tricentis for sponsoring. Mitchell, why don't you take it home for us?
Thanks, Alan. You mentioned culture and failure, and it reminds me of, we've all heard the saying failure is not an option, going back to Apollo 13. Actually, that's not true. That's the opposite is true. What people dying was not an option, not failure. We had to fail to figure out how to get them home. And software is always going to fail. It will. We know it. We live it every day. But Nora mentioned and talked a little bit about learning. Every one of those failures is learning, whether it happened the moment you checked in code and got a test run, to when we did some engineering and testing, production, canary testing, whatever it might be in production. I think the main message here, though, is not only is it a cycle, we need to think about software holistically, all parts of where we develop it, how we create it, how we test it, how it lives, how it grows and matures, and someday other software replaces it. We're going to have issues all during that process. And how do we find those things the best we can? And then when we don't find them, how do we react and solve them quickly? Because they're going to happen. So my parting thoughts.
Absolutely. And that brings us right to the top of the hour. Folks, thank you again. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Check us out on our next DevOps Unbound. And if you get a chance, join us at a live DevOps Unbound roundtable. They're a lot of fun. Until then, this is Alan Schimmel for Techstrong. Be well. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, we're back at the Open Source Software Summit in lovely Dublin, Ireland, and we're talking with Dr. Ibrahim Haddad, who's the new head of the PyTorch Foundation, which is an arm of the Linux Foundation, and we'll explain what all that means as we go along here. But PyTorch is a machine learning framework that people are getting very excited about, originally developed at our friends now called Meta. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, and welcome to the Open Source Summit.
Awesome. So why is there such excitement about PyTorch specifically? Because there's a lot of different machine learning frameworks that are out there, but what is it about this one that seems to be garnering more attention?
So PyTorch as a project is really the largest project in its category. So when we started tracking the open source ecosystem about 5 years ago or so, and even today, there are about 12 to 15 different frameworks that do more or less kind of similar functionalities within that domain. And over time, for the past few years, Meta has done really an amazing job in growing the community of the PyTorch project. So when you look at the project, there are over 2,400 code contributors to it, coming from thousands of organizations, and there are other 18,000 projects that use PyTorch as a dependency for them. So there has been really an incredible increase in adoption and contribution to the project, making it really kind of the star project within its category. And a lot of people are excited to see the project move to the foundation, transition to an open governance model, and then from this point on, grow as a foundation project where Meta and the other founding members are just one of several companies that are formally funding the efforts of the project and supporting it under the framework of the foundation.
Now, you would think that the folks who work on AI are some of the smartest guys in the world, but it seems like maybe we've been reinventing the same wheel over and over again in these different frameworks. So will this whole process ultimately get more efficient?
Yeah, so it's really an interesting question because you see the same situation in many other areas within the AI domain or even within the cloud domain or any other technology domain where you have a lot of effort that look like they're doing the same thing. There's a lot of fragmentation. And over time, efforts consolidate. And then you have, at the end of the day, a few years later, one or two winners that grab most of the market share. So when we look at the domain of AI, 5 years ago, there were about 70 key projects in the ecosystem that we identified as critical, that we were following up on and featuring. And what's really interesting is even though, that landscape captured about 70 projects, today we are about 330, there's a lot of fragmentation and a lot of the projects trying to do more or less the same thing. And that goes part to the fact that a lot of these efforts were internal efforts. They were like a feature in a product, or they were an internal effort to achieve X, Y, or Z. And over time, these organizations that founded these efforts realized that the value is not in the library they're creating, or it's not in the platform, or it's not in the framework. And they decided to open source these and build the communities around it and use it as a foundation for what they're building. The real value for such organization is in the data and the models that need these frameworks to operate on. So that's how we ended up with 12 to 15 deep learning framework, with 15 machine learning framework, with 20 learning framework or training framework, and so on. And over time, really the market, in this case the market are the adoptees of this project and contributors, they decide who's the winner based on how friendly the community is, how easy it is to use the software, how useful it is, feature set, and many other factors. And we end up with a couple, 2-3 major players. So in the PyTorch situation, this is really kind of a monumental move, really. First, it is a major commitment from Meta to open source, because if you have such an amazing project, it's been widely adopted and massive community, and there's hundreds of tens of thousands of organizations adopting it. It is really, you're going out of your way to move it to a foundation. I mean, you can continue down that path, but Meta's team and Meta AI team decided, hey, we want this to be even more impactful at a much global level, and we want to take that project, move it, and transition it into a foundation. And we as Meta, for instance, become one of several players that are funding the effort and ushering it into its kind of the next future evolution. So really, I'm super excited about this. And if you asked me 3 years ago, I wouldn't have guessed this is going to happen. And in AI and data, which I run, LFA and data, every month we would have our calls and we discuss how are we going to bring PyTorch to the foundation? And, it happened on its own. There's a time where the organization realizes, hey, this is something good we need to do for our community. And this shows kind of a certain really extreme high maturity and strategy with open source. And then, they did that, and here we are.
Are we on the cusp of getting to a point where just about every application you're going to build going forward is going to have some type of AI, machine learning capability built into it? It seems like it's becoming core capability. And as that progresses, does the standardization of the frameworks help accelerate that transition, because people won't be sitting there trying to figure out which of these 13 things to use?
Yeah, so I think there are two parts to your question. So on the first part, absolutely. I think as we kind of move forward, everything today we do is touched by AI, whether we know it or not. When you go to, let's say, Netflix, all these different suggestions coming on the screen are based on previous things, on different models that run and try to guess your preferences. Or when you go to the Amazon and you want to buy products, it just gives you suggestion. And this is just kind of really kind of the tip of the iceberg. And there are a lot of things happening today in the insurance sector, in the banking sector, where a lot of it is driven by AI and machine learning. So I think going into the future, this is here to stay. That's kind of the future, is a lot of product, services, and anything we touch is really going to be by some part driven and enabled by AI. Now to your kind of next question, I think with respect to PyTorch, eventually all the adoption will have to filter down. So when we look at the deep learning frameworks, for example, I know, for instance, in China, Angel is a deep learning framework that is extremely widely adopted in China. And they have thousands of organizations using it, and they have a few dozen large organizations contributing to it. But it's kind of very limited in its adoption to that geography. And there are multiple such instances. And I think when you are an organization and you want to adopt open source technology, you typically want to have a project that is hosted in any foundation where there isn't a single control point on the project, where the foundation manages the project, it owns its IT infrastructure, it controls its assets, it owns its intellectual property, so it's never in any way, shape, or form ever used against you as an adoptee for whatever reason. So when you find a project that meets your needs, it is hosted in a foundation, it offers you a path to become a leader in the project if you invest in it in terms of resources and contributions, and that project has its assets sitting in a neutral home that is vendor-free from all the different pressures, then this is additional motivations for you. Say, I want to do that. I want to put my money and my resources and rely on this specific open source project in my product or service because I know it's going to be there in 5 years. I know there's the foundation looking after this project, nurturing its community, supporting its expenses, and so on. So it certainly provides a lot of incentives for organizations.
Will we see more of a democratization of these capabilities so that the average mere mortal developer, or maybe it shows up in a low-code tool or a no-code tool somehow or other, to invoke these capabilities? Or is it always going to sit up here in this kind of high priest, data scientist kind of realm? Or, are we going to see this technology kind of filter down through the ecosystem?
So it absolutely is going to filter down. And I think a great indication of this is the ecosystem around, whether it's PyTorch or Kubernetes is a great example because its predecessor, they've been around for a few years now. When you look at the ecosystem of Kubernetes, there are hundreds of supporting tools around Kubernetes that helps people with their deployment and their monitoring and their security and their auditing and many, many other aspects. And similarly to that, I think the future will be kind of looks the same for PyTorch or any of the other winners, within their own category, where you have the major project, which is PyTorch, for example, and you have this growing ecosystem of tools and enabling tools around it that will enable really anybody, necessarily not an AI PhD expert or not a data scientist, to be able to use these tools and rely on them in order to generate insights and business intelligence for whatever purpose they want to do.
Mm-hmm. One of the challenges we hear a lot about is that the models today are built mainly by data scientists who are working on their timeline, and they can be anywhere from 3 months to a year to build the thing. And then there's a DevOps team that's building applications, and they're doing updates, several times a week, sometimes monthly. And we're trying to insert the models into these DevOps workflows, and we don't really have the best practices to do that yet. So is that something you guys are going to be thinking about, is how to kind of make it easier to insert the models into the applications and kind of build all the inference engines and then update that, because it's a whole cycle of things.
Yeah. So good question. So on the short term, for the next few months, as a foundation, PyTorch Foundation, we are putting a lot of efforts, and our kind of almost exclusive focus is going to be on the transition. So we had really an amazing amount of work that's been done for the past 5 to 6 months by Meta, AMD, NVIDIA, and the other partners, Microsoft and Google, in pulling efforts. And I think we were looking at our internal tool where we had over 2,000 tasks that needs to be accomplished to get us on the keynote stage on Wednesday to announce. So a lot of people were involved, thousands of emails, hundreds of calls. So the next few months for us...
Lots of lawyers, I imagine.
Lots of efforts in the coming weeks and months will be on the transitioning of the project's assets and transitioning the governance and all of that. And I think in parallel to that, we are today going through the exercise of kind of pulling feedback, bringing in feedback, what do you think now that we have a foundation and we have an operating budget and we have existing staff and staff that we're hiring, how we as a foundation should be supporting the project as a technical community? That can be training, and we've released one course, and we have multiple on the roadmap. That can be certification program, better improved infrastructure, and many other key areas. And one of these key areas, for instance, is developer experience, documentation, and the point you brought in. But I think we're a little bit not there yet in terms of roadmap as we kind of bring in and to kind of take a deep breath after the announcement and realize, okay, now we have like 5,000 more tasks to get us to the next phase. But definitely all of the mentions of the items you mentioned are items we're aware of, and we realize that we need to get there, and the foundation just formalizes that effort as a community.
But if I wanted to be a contributor or a maintainer, there's already a large community there to participate in, and I can join in there. So just how big is that community, and how does one become a member of it?
So are you talking a community as a developer community, not kind of a PyTorch membership?
Well, not a vendor, partner, sponsor, more just the average person.
So yesterday I actually had a fire chat with Sumit Shintala. Sumit is a co-founder, lead maintainer of the project, was there from day one, and he is an AI researcher at Meta. And I actually asked him, so the same question you're asking me. So I'm just going to relay the message, and thank you to Sumit for that. So basically today there's actually a lot of documentation available, and I was really impressed by it. As we started working with the partners as with Meta, I was really curious about learning more about the project, and I started looking at a lot of the online documentation. So there's really very detailed documentation whose goal is to support individuals. Hey, I'm curious, I'm a student, I'm studying AI, or I'm a developer at whatever company, and I want to explore if PyTorch is suitable for my needs. So there's a lot of documentation available for you to go and start and be able to do the equivalent of Hello World and see it work, and then kind of get engaged more and more. There's the contributor guidelines, there's contributor documentation, and we're actually working and have some ideas for additional things that we can do to enable developers. And this is actually on our to-do list.
So it may already exist, but will there maybe be a PyTorch University someday? Is that part of the equation?
So I don't know if this is going to be a PyTorch University, but definitely we are keen on making available educational resources. We're starting making courses available via the Linux Foundation training department. And we have at least one more course being worked on today as we speak. And it is something that we consider high priority. We're making education on the framework itself highly accessible. As you know, as projects grow and grow, it becomes really difficult for people to come in and engage because there's this intimidation factor. Wow, there's like hundreds of thousands, if not more, lines of code, a lot of modules, a lot of different kind of subparts, where to get started. So we want to make the developer journey extremely easy and kind of flowing, super easy for the developers. We want to kind of remove any friction. And the way to do that is providing training, documentation, and we're even considering certification similar to the Kubernetes world, where you have developer certifications and certifications for organizations and so on. So, and this is really could not have been possible without Meta's commitment to open source, into moving this into foundation and enabling the contributions of others, and having a foundation care for the project.
In terms of people becoming members of the foundation itself, whether it's gold, silver, are you looking to bring in more end user organizations? Because there's a lot of vendors that are in this space, but sometimes I feel like the end user organizations trail a little bit when they wait to see how things are shaking out. But I mean, are there more end user organizations involved, or do you want them involved? And is that something that's a goal?
Yeah, so I think at this point we only announced the founding members. You can imagine the amount of work that went into kind of getting us here. So we didn't want during that formation days or months to be stuck in a way in discussions about how many levels should we have, what are the membership fees that will help us sustain the foundation, what are the benefits associated with, these are discussions that can really drag on and maybe take us off our goal to announce. So we decided let's just focus on the founding level, and then as soon as we convene as a board after the announcement, which will be in a couple of weeks, we're going to have a lot of items to discuss, and one of them is membership. What are the levels we need to have? And I think personally, I believe the user group are extremely beneficial. If you look at the CNCF, they have that. and it's provided an immense amount of feedback back into the foundation, into the project, and it's extremely useful. So I think there are really a lot of opportunities, whether it's the kind of the end user forums, if you wish, or you called, or PyTorch champions, if you think of CNCF champions or ambassadors. So there are really a lot of really positive and successful models looking at other umbrella foundations that we can look at, learn from them, and kind of replicate within the restrictions or the model of PyTorch.
All right, so let's get out our AI augmented crystal ball. Where are we going to be a year from now?
We're going to be in a much better place than today. We're going to be, more companies, more developers, and this is not kind of being overconfident. It's just like when we look back at the growth of PyTorch for the past, 5 or 6 years, it's been really monumental. And year over year, more organizations adopting the project, more organizations are relying on it, more projects using it as a dependency, and more developers contributing to it. And we actually monitor a couple things. We monitor the contributions from the same developers. So same developers are contributing more, and new developers are engaging on a long-term basis. So we're actually in the process of onboarding PyTorch to the foundation and adding it to our LFX platform, which will give us much deeper insights into all developer-related contributions to the project. So I think in a couple months, if we sit back and you ask me the same questions, I'm going to be able to pull up a slide and say, hey, a month ago we were at this in terms of contribution, number of commits, adoptees, etc., and today we're at this. And I'm really confident in how the project is moving, that we're on a positive trend in terms of all these different metrics.
All right, folks, write this day down, because in a few years you're going to sit back and go, I remember when this thing just got started.
Awesome.
Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
All right.
Thank you.
Guys, we'll be back in a few minutes.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey folks, welcome back to the Open Source Summit. We're here in lovely Dublin, Ireland, and we're talking with Marcus Figueredo, who's the Director of Global Platforms and Solutions and Offerings for Fujitsu. And it turns out Fujitsu's been doing a lot of work with Postgres over the years in Japan, and now they've also done some interesting stuff with containers, and they're going beyond Japan. They're going to be here in Europe, and they're coming to the US. So Marcus,
Great.
Welcome to the show.
Yeah, nice to be here. Actually, it's a great opportunity to spread the word that we're actually going outside of Japan now, and we're focusing on bringing a lot of the heritage actually we have around open source and Postgres to the other markets, right? So we are expanding in the US, expanding in Europe. Of course, we have a footprint in Asia, but we think it makes sense now to tell, hey, we're doing this. We have expertise. We're actually giving back to the community. And our main focus is around Postgres. That's our main software, but we are actually expanding. We're doing a lot of work around containers, Kubernetes especially, because there's a lot going on this space of databases, and people need some of the automations and toolings that you can get with containers. So it's all about DevOps, how you can actually make it easy for folks to tap into a database, right?
To that point, we have been hearing and talking about stateless apps for containers forever and a day. Now we're finally starting to see some more stateful applications. And it's a bit of a debate. There are some people out there who are like, there's no way in heck that you should be storing data on a Kubernetes cluster. So what drives people to put the database on the cluster, and what needs to be done to enable that?
Right, that's a great question. So something I keep hearing from clients, it's really, why should I put a database actually on containers? That's probably the last thing I want to put on containers, because I might not get the performance. But I think we got to a point where we have mature enough tooling to get us to deliver the same capabilities that we were getting on traditional bare metal or virtualized environments. Now we have all those capabilities into the containers. So we have actually launched early this year our full capability around OpenShift, for example. They call level 5, right? Operators, they don't have a standard necessarily, but level 5 basically means we have full auto-scaling, monitoring and capabilities to allow the developer to connect to the database without knowing too much about it. And on the same time, he can tap into high performance storage, high performance compute, if those things are connected to their Kubernetes cluster, right? So because of this evolution of the toolings, I think we are to the point where we're going to see a lot of these stateful applications actually now really being migrated into containers. So I think we are at the tipping point from that perspective.
There are a lot of people who do not have an existing data storage architecture that they can call externally, and so if it's greenfield, you got to have some data somewhere, so likely is you're going to attach it to the cluster anyway, because that may be all you have.
Correct. Yes, and there is a lot around, there's a question around NoSQL tends to be more suitable for this types of environment, especially greenfields, because developers, they don't need to talk with a DBA, right? So they can just go out and then connect to a NoSQL and then start using without worrying too much about, well, what's my schema going to look like, or how do I optimize this to make the application will not perform? The funny thing is, when we got Postgres, which is a traditional object relational database, and we bring operators around Kubernetes, we actually give a lot of those capabilities back to the developer. So they don't need to worry too much. Yeah, still there is a need to think about how they're going to scale long term. But when you start putting those toolings, then now they get the auto scalability that they would get using a non-SQL, right? Without having to worry about to worry too much about how the thing's going to shard in the future, or if they're going to get a lot of data spread all over. So yeah, again, back to the tooling, I think what we're doing around containers, it's really provide a tool set to allow, even if you're starting from scratch, to allow you to grow in a way that application can become an enterprise at any moment, right?
We have been hearing about the developers don't need no stinking DBA thing for a long time, but it seems like what happens is they get about into their third or fourth database and they go, oh, well, maybe I need a DBA, but I don't want to admit it's a DBA, so I give it a different title or a different job function. Right. So what is the relationship between developers and DBAs as we go forward, and what should it be?
Well, I think more and more DBAs will have to understand what the challenges are for the developers and move away just from the little silo. So I think what DevOps really does is really breaks the silo. So now you need to understand the other sides of the equation, right? So the same thing we have with DBAs and developers, you have between DBAs and infrastructure architects, right? So all of that has to go away to have DevOps to work and to realize the full benefit of operating in an agile way and leveraging what DevOps can deliver. So I think DBAs will potentially have a change of title, or they will have to understand better what the needs are, and then things will start to change in terms of how developers and DBAs communicate with each other, right? There is a lot around database as a service, which is usually an easy way for developers, again, to tap into databases without knowing about the data in itself, how the data will be structured. But what we're seeing actually back to the containers is that is good to a point. When you need to get control back and when you need to scale and then have a full enterprise solution, container seems to be a better fit actually than just going into the cloud and using a database as a service and forgetting about, hey, I don't need a DBA anymore because I can buy this from somebody else. What we see in reality is that's true to an extent, right? When you get to a level where you really need performance and you really need to make something super reliable, that's where you need a DBA again, right? So that I don't think that's going away. It's just morphing into something a little bit different, right?
Do you think people don't understand enough about the issue with cloud native microservices based applications that are built using these containers is there's a lot of dependencies, there's a lot of calls to data through these APIs, and so performance becomes a much bigger issue than it used to be, and I'm not sure that people understand that going in.
I agree. I think for the most part, we're still very new to it. Again, I see a lot of changes happening, and there's maturity now in terms of some of the architectures are getting to the point where, well, this is becoming really enterprise. Again, for the most part, I think people are still trying to absorb and really understand all the parts, especially when you go to a microservice architecture. It is a shift, right? A complete shift in terms of how you think about the applications, how you think about the data, where the data is going to be located, how you make the call to the right APIs, and how you put performance, reliability, scalability into the equation, right? I still think it's very new for the most part. We've been talking for this about, 5-7 years maybe, but still it's very new when you compare it to what people have been doing with traditional monolithic applications, monolithic databases. They've been doing this for 50 years, right? And not a lot has changed from the times of the mainframe. Traditional databases into an Oracle today, but when you look into microservices, containers in itself, there's a big shift. So the jump, I think people are learning how to do the jump, but not everybody's there yet. So that's how I see it, at least.
One of the words in the database lexicon that everybody hates is sharding.
Yes.
Can we get rid of sharding, or are we still going to have sharding as we go along?
I think we're still going to have it. So Postgres, the version 15, you see some things the community is bringing into in terms of trying to address that. I honestly don't think we're going to get rid of it. Not in the next 2 releases at least. But again, I might be wrong. That's very debatable. But that's how I see it. I think still going to be there. There are things that we do to work around those issues. I think some implementations get more exposed to it. I think it's not a super complex on Postgres that is sitting on NoSQLs, for example, but still something that needs to be addressed, right? And consider as you architect the whole solution.
As we go along, how automated can all this management of the databases get? And are we looking at, maybe some form of AI will come down the pike and we'll have algorithms take care of stuff? I mean, how advanced are we at the moment?
So I think when you look at some of the proprietary implementations, right, you see some of the main vendors calling out autonomous database, which in parts, yes, there's a lot that can be simplified when you put automation, a lot that you can do with machine learning and AI capabilities. But I don't think we're going to eliminate the need to have a data expert. No matter how evolved the AI becomes and our understanding of how we can automate things, I think we're still going to need a database expert. Again, even if that title changes, still you need somebody to understand how the data needs to be stored, what the things need to be considered as you evolve in the architecture. But there's a lot that can be done in terms of simplify. One of the things is deploying a traditional relational database in containers. It's challenging. It's not an easy task. Again, when you put things as performance, scalability in the context, it becomes challenging. You can just stand up a Postgres in a container and say, well, I'm done, I can use it, but that's not the reality when you need to scale. And when you get to operators, that's really bringing the automation, right? So it is, how do I do backups in a way that I don't need to really fully understand how the backups work, right? So you want to remove or create abstractions around that to allow developers or even the expert managing the cluster to be able to back up the data, to auto scaling when they sense, well, there's a need to increase capacity or a need to increase compute for this database or more memory. So all those things actually, we have it today. We actually evolving. We are in our second iteration actually on our operator. And we're not just working with OpenShift, right? We're also doing work with AKS, EKS, the Alibaba version of it, SUSE as well, the Rancher. So all of those flavors we are integrating and certifying on how we can actually tap and build our operator to be compatible and portable, because portability is also key here, right? You don't want to get into one specific cluster and be locked into it, right?
One wise guy once said, it's one thing to be wrong, it's another thing to be wrong at scale. That's kind of what we're talking about. So you're going to need a human to kind of manage all that process. Do you think people are trying to do too much with microservices and distributed computing services? And, data has gravity. The laws of physics have not been suspended. So are people not thinking through the physical location of the data related to where the application logic is properly?
Yes, we see that a lot, right? What I see sometimes is when you go to big organizations, what they tend to do is, yes, we need to go into containers, or we need to put everything in microservices. And what you see is a lift and shift. So they're not breaking things down, they're not rethinking the whole logic, right? And tapping into why would you go to microservices in the first place, right? They basically get their database, install a Postgres or whatever version of database that they might be using, relational or not. They just lift that from what they had on-prem or even in the cloud running on a virtual machine. They just dump in there, hoping that will address the issue. And that's not the case, right? You have to really rethink. When you're redesigning and you are thinking again scalability, you have to rethink the whole process, right? The whole framework, right? It's not just about I need to use a microservice. And when you talk about data gravity, I think that's really the next big iteration for automation in terms of like operators, for example, is the capability of sensing latency and trying to move data between locations. One of the big things that we see when clients are looking into a Kubernetes deployment, it's really, I can be multi-cloud. Right? And everybody's talking, multi-cloud, we are multi-cloud. But laws of physics, it doesn't make sense for you to have your data in one hyperscaler and then your application running another hyperscaler and then connecting because you're going to pay for the traffic, all those things. And then the latency might just go to the roof. Again, there are some experimentations in terms of saying, well, data can be spread all over and we're going to make it low latency. But when we look into real, true enterprise applications, they are tapping into open source to solve their issues. We see the reality is not that simple, right? There's still a lot of complexities that need to be managed. I think we're getting there, but we're not there yet. So that's a great point. So the multi-cloud still does not eliminate the need to know where your data is located. Are your apps accessing that? Where is your user actually getting into to access your data? So yeah, that's a pain point that people need to consider. And that's not going away.
Are we getting better at moving data? Because when I was much younger, the movement of data was considered the root of all evil. Nothing good can happen when you start moving data around. So have we kind of solved that issue? How close are we?
I think we have a lot more tooling now. And those tools, they are very sophisticated in terms of allowing you to even migrate between different types of databases. One massive trend that we see is people moving away from commercial databases into Postgres. That's why Postgres became so popular, because hyperscalers are adopting. They have a lot of the tools to migrate data from one place to the other. And then there's the promise of portability, right? Which it goes back to, okay, so I can move my data anywhere and basically I'm free, right? What people don't realize is there's a lot of hooks. When you go to theoretical community Postgres, the vendors are putting a lot of hooks in there where when you try to migrate, the migration will not succeed, not going to be successful because you have dependencies behind the scenes. And that's interesting because for us, Fujitsu, one of the things that we have is we added a few enterprise capabilities to our enterprise flavor of Postgres. But a key thing for us is to maintain 100% compatibility with community Postgres to the point where the client, they will be with us, not because of our software is unique or lock them in, it's because really we're providing a services or we're actually providing the expertise for them to be able to think about data movement, or how they should approach data. And if they're not happy with us, they can just move that to a community Postgres and then just use that. Or if they want to let their employees to just use community Postgres on the laptops and then bring that to the enterprise version only when they're going to deploy that in production, that's also perfectly fine for us. So, and that's a lot of people don't realize that, but that's a very different approach. Other vendors you see, there's a lot of around Oracle compatibility modes and those things. What folks don't realize is you're just switching the evils, right? So you were locked into a vendor. Now with this compatibility mode, yes, you can just flip the switch and then have an easy migration, but guess what? You just no longer locked in here, you're just locked in here, right? So that's something that you're really serious considering portability, that's something you should consider.
So what ultimately is your best advice to folks about how to get started? Because clearly, this is not simple, and you need some skills to go do this. So where do I go find these skills?
So, of course, the first place I would recommend is, of course, look us up on the web. We are, like I said, a lot of our original documentation, it was in Japanese, but we're doing a big effort on converting that to English. And we are also building capacity outside of Japan. So we're using that expertise globally. So we're open to talk with folks. And we also open to interact with the community in terms of providing back expertise. We have committers into the Postgres community that they don't do anything on our enterprise side. They focus on giving back upstream code. So for anyone thinking about containers, DevOps, how does that play into what I'm doing today in terms of relational database? We're here online. You can just search it up, Fujitsu Postgres. You'll find us online. And I'll be happy actually to also reach out and talk with anyone. We have a team of experts globally, and we're more than happy to engage and have some of those discussions.
All right, folks, it's as they always say, don't try this at home. Get some help. Hey, thanks for coming by.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Take care. And we'll be back in a few more minutes.
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse IT-focused audience. Innotech conferences occur throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Innotech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Innotech conferences deliver. 2022 events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Innotech conferences are produced by Techstrong Live and powered by Techstrong Group.
Hey everyone, happy Tuesday. Cody J. Brown here with some more programs happening this week at Techstrong Learning. Wednesday, October 26th at 1 p.m. Eastern, Revenera joins us to discuss the importance of managing your open source software, maintaining an accurate service bill of materials, and how these reinforce cybersecurity throughout the open source ecosystem. You will not want to miss Managed Software Ingredients for complete transparency. Following, on DevOps.com, this Plutora assembled panel will review the impact of value stream management, how to get started, and perhaps most importantly, how to get your leadership on board. Join us Wednesday, October 26th at 3 p.m. Eastern for How Do I Get Started and Succeed at Digital Transformation. And our loan program on Thursday kicks off at 3 p.m. Eastern with Migrate from Jenkins to Circle CI on AWS to accelerate your software delivery. If you'd like to make the transition to Circle CI on AWS from Jenkins, we will discuss the challenges, solutions, and maybe some success stories. So that is all I've got for you right now. But as always, we have plenty of upcoming and on-demand programs for you here at Techstrong Learning. So stay tuned.
Previously on Engineering the Change.
It's kind of like being on a football team. You got to make cuts to the roster, right? But we got to take it down to 3 finalists. Her essay was one of the best essays I've ever read in the 3 or 4 times we've done this.
Yeah.
So,
She's in.
But there was, to me, Carly epitomizes why we do this. I give extra bonus points to people who can write well and can express themselves, and Donald did express himself. All right, so let's go through this then. Stephanie Sanchez, Donald Brazil, and Carly Duvel are our 3 finalists for this cohort's Engineering the Change Scholarship.
Engineering the Change has literally changed the lives of scholarship winners. Here are our past recipients.
My name is Victoria Roas. I am an immigrant from Brazil. I came to this country when I was 10 years old.
My name is Drew Johnson. I'm a full-stack software engineer.
My name is Alina Maluk. I'm from Ukraine. I'm the winner of scholarship from 2 cohorts before me.
The Engineering of Change scholarship that I won last year was life-changing.
I really poured my soul and told my story to them, and a few weeks later I got a call from Alan, and it was, I even cried on the phone, I think. And it was like a life-changing moment.
The program at Boca Code was amazing. It was easy for me with zero experience to learn the fundamentals of software development.
My career is completely changed from barely being able to, hold down a job to now being sought after by some of the biggest tech companies in the world.
Boca Code has built me up.
I got a job at hot fintech software company at the day of graduation.
I think that becoming a software engineer has been one of the most rewarding things in my life.
I am Carly Duberval, mother of 2 amazing children. I have a bachelor degree in accounting.
My name is Donald Brazil. I was born in Haiti. I was raised in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Growing up, I've always been interested in technology.
Hi, my name is Stephanie. I'm originally from Haiti. I've resided in Miami for wherever it feels. I currently have a degree in psychology, and I enjoy helping people.
I migrated recently to Florida because of insecurity and political issue.
I fell into software engineering as something I would love to pursue.
I feel like there is a void that that I still have. There's something tugging at me because I feel like I have not challenged myself to reach my full potential.
Here in US, my degree is not accepted. I need to work for my family duties.
Winning this scholarship is a great opportunity for me to finally, pursue that career in software engineering. And, I would love to, give back to those who were in my position where they were completely lost and didn't really have any guidance.
My goal is to be a vessel to other people, other underrepresented communities.
Without money and resources, I can't afford to go to Boca Code.
And being a finalist is an amazing opportunity. I would never have thought I would have been even considered.
This field, I will be good at it. And I have an opportunity to make an impact on my community and the world.
If I won this scholarship, I will share my knowledge with other black women, immigrants, who share my faith.
I would love to, have the opportunity at the end of the day to showcase those who believe in me, and then, help others who also, would be in the same position that I am.
Because I know my contribution will make a lifelong impact on the world.
Thanks so much for joining us here for this interview today. And you know what? Making it to the finals for this is an accomplishment in and of itself. And I think it really talks about the kind of person you are. And reading your essay, I was very, very impressed. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
In 5 years, I will be that software engineer who will help immigrants to achieve their dreams.
5 years, I would love to see myself, slowly opening my organization, have it on the ground, running. I just want to see myself helping others, just like others help me. I just want to give back to those who gave to me.
I see myself hopefully excelling in the field of software engineering, and I don't know exactly what my niche will be. So I know that I'm going to be excelling. I don't know exactly what it'll look like right now, but you guys will be proud.
Why do you want to be a software engineer? What's gonna make you stick through this at the end of the day?
I love it. I can do it. I will do it. Why I will do it? Because I love it.
It's just a great field to get into. The technology portion of it is just something I've always been interested in. As a kid, I've always been interested in computers, phones, gadgets.
I always felt a need or a pull toward doing something for someone else. In the field of engineering, allows me to continue to do that, because whether it is in a medical field, the automotive field, just the world of entrepreneurship, there's just so many different ways that I can continue doing good and making an impact.
One of the things that's very near and dear to my heart is, equity, parity, gender diversity, and just diversity and parity on all levels, equality. And I wonder how do you envision going about doing that?
Like I did with my old career, I lift women to accounting in my country. I motivate them, I assist them, and help them to achieve, like I said, to achieve their dream, to be excellent in this field.
I would love to open an organization that can, give back to those and help guide them with the, the opportunities that, I'd had from this experience.
What drives you to do software engineering and not, go back to something that you've already known and you've obviously been very successful at?
I would say now everything is technology. So why should I say in accounting? If the world is moving and everything now is tech. I have two brothers. One died in 2007. He was a senior software engineer. My youngest brother is a software engineer. Why not me? It's because I'm woman? No. I want it, I will do it.
At the moment right now, I work inventory for a home installation company. It's a pretty okay job, but it's not what I feel that I was meant to do.
The knowledge I have, I can pass on to other people. I know some of the challenges that our communities face. So with my knowledge and my mentorship, whether it's mentoring one person or just a group of people, exposing them to this field and to just other fields that exist where there's more to life than just what is in front of us. And I believe that I can be a bridge in that gap.
How do you feel like the scholarship is gonna do to you? Like, why is it important for you to win this?
I will share my knowledge with people, with women or immigrants and use my knowledge to help them.
This scholarship is giving me that opportunity to show the world that, I can do great things.
So this scholarship would definitely assist me in changing the trajectory of my life and hopefully where I can continue this same legacy in helping other people as well.
Your essay was amazing. Your answers here today were amazing. You really do represent what engineering the change is all about. Thanks for coming in today, and we can't wait to announce our winners soon.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
This is Techstrong TV.
Well, I have the great pleasure of being joined by Reza Shafi. Reza is VP of Product with Kong. Welcome, Reza.
Thank you. Great to be here, Mitch.
Good to be talking with you. Well, we'll jump into some of the great news that from announcements you've had recently. Before we do that, tell us about yourself. You have an impressive background, great background, and tell us, of course, what Kong does.
Yeah, for sure. So Reza Shafi, VP of Product at Kong, as you said, and I've been here for 3 years. My general background is I call API and middleware geek. Was at BEA Systems back in the days, and then Oracle, and then MuleSoft, CoreOS, Red Hat, and now here at Kong. So what Kong does is next generation API management. API management, as you know, has been around for a bit now. We have a cloud-native full lifecycle API management stack that we're very proud of, and that we announced a lot of capabilities around last week at our summit, which is our customer event.
Fantastic. Well, let's get into that. So one of the big announcements you just mentioned was around the API Gateway, which I think is in GA now, right? Publicly available. Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, this has been in the works for a while. You've had it in tech preview and beta, I imagine, and now getting it in, for sale, customers' hands. Tell us what's happening with the product, maybe what some of the unique things are about it.
Yeah, so Kong 3.0, Kong Gateway 3.0 is our first major release. We follow a semantic versioning model. So it's a first major release in 18 months. So it's a pretty big deal for us. And the reason for it is that not only it provides major new capabilities, which I'll talk about in a second, but also has fundamental architectural improvements that makes it faster, even more robust than it has been. So there's a lot of beauty on the inside stuff that's gone into Kong Gateway 3.0 as well. In terms of the functionality, I divided up in my mind around the open source version and the enterprise version. On the open source version, we have introduced two things that I would say are really noteworthy. One is, how Gateway enables you to effectively create routing rules and take those routing rules and map them to backend upstreams, and in the middle inject some logic that can either protect the traffic or redirect the traffic or detect, intrusions and so on. Our routing rules have significantly expanded now in terms of being able to have a whole new domain-specific language for specifying those routing rules. It's not just a regex anymore. It has and or and combination of those things, which makes it a lot more flexible for creating routing rules. So we're really excited about that. Also, we've introduced an open telemetry plugin, which enables us to work with any OpenTelemetry compliant monitoring solution, literally click of a button, right? Like you put the plugin, say, this is Datadog, this is AppDynamics, any OpenTelemetry compliance vendor or tool, and now you get the tracing capabilities around and you can apply that plugin at any route, at any upstream, globally, all the flexibility of the Kong gateway. So those are the two really exciting things at the open source level. There's a whole bunch of stuff on the enterprise side, which I'll get into, but any thoughts, Mitch, on the open source stuff?
Yeah, I'm really intrigued. Well, great to hear. I mean, I love regex, super powerful, but not accessible to everyone. You could spend a career learning regex and tricks and tips. I'm really interested in your plugin architecture, because that sometimes is the part that's a little tricky, wonky to create and do it right. And sometimes it takes multiple tries to get it right. And it sounds like with your open telemetry and some of the capabilities you have in plugins, you have the ability to connect with, of course, other third products, but I imagine you're also talking about Kubernetes as an environment that you're operating with and within and interconnecting with that. Is that a fair guess on my part?
Absolutely. So you touched on a couple of points, I think, that are really interesting. One is, one of Kong's secret sauces is plugin capability, which is dynamically you can inject these pieces of logic within different parts of the plugin lifecycle, of the request and response lifecycle.
Mm-hmm.
And that interface, that plugin interface is open. So there's thousands of plugins out there that have been developed. Usually when users or customers ask me, how can I do X? Is there a plugin for that? I just do a Google Kong, whatever, and then you see someone has built a plugin for it. And we have over 100 that we provide out of the box. The flexibility of those plugins now is with respect to the routing rules is not changed. In that you still apply the plugins at the same level, but the routing rules decide how the actual requests are mapped to the routes that you've created. But you bring up an interesting point, which is in the enterprise version, we've introduced something called plugin ordering. One of the top requests from our customers was, I apply these plugins, but can I decide plugin A runs first, maybe always do token validation with my custom, server, and then after that, perform for the following request transformation, right? Before you couldn't have that level of flexibility on how the plugins are ordered. Now it is there in our enterprise version. And then you touched on Kubernetes. There's two ways to run Kong on Kubernetes. One is you run the plain vanilla Kong gateway on Kubernetes. You use this admin interface, which is a RESTful API, and you use a tool we got called Deck for DevOps, right, which basically does declarative config with gateway. Or you could run it as an ingress controller. We actually introduced Ingress Controller 2.6, which supports the Kubernetes Gateway API in beta. Which we're very excited about. And we led the charge in creating that. So until now, you could apply CRDs to apply things like HTTP routes, UDP routes, and so on. But now you apply those standard Kubernetes CRDs. So we're standardizing that layer on Kubernetes, which is very exciting.
I'm interested, curious about that. Is there certain scenarios where the ingress approach is better or more capable than the other approach? Tell us a little bit about why both and why that's significant.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is a question that comes up a lot from our customers as well. I think really it comes down to your operational mode of preference, right? There are many customers who increasingly like to operate their Kubernetes clusters using CRDs alone, right? And map that to things like GitOps tools, right, that work at the CRD level. And in those models, the ingress way of doing it is the right way of doing it. On the other hand, there are customers that go, Kubernetes is just another deployment target. And I actually want to have another layer on top of Kubernetes that standardizes the way I do config management deployment. And for those customers, using our standard interface is better because they have non-Kubernetes and Kubernetes ways, and they just go, it's all Kong config, it's not Kubernetes. I don't take a side.
Kubernetes and manage it through, that path, or I'm comfortable in Kong, let me do it this way and do all my things here. Makes sense. Good. Well, we'll talk some more about some other announcements from last week, approximate about when, I'm not sure when this will air, but probably a week or two away from your summit.
Yeah, so we also announced a slew of capabilities around Kong Connect. Kong Connect is our cloud solution that you can access at konghq.com. And literally within a few clicks of the button, it enables you to run a Kong gateway, right? And we got a plus credit card-based tier, as well as a free tier, as well as enterprise tier. So Kong Connect has been really taking off for both sort of single gateway users, because it takes away the operational complexity of running the control plane. So it's like the easiest way to run Kong gateway. But also more and more, and we had a lot of great customers come in and talk about this. There is this platform builder pattern in organization that I'm sure you're aware of. The people who build the platforms that make it available to all the app builders. And they have more and more for a need for something I call connectivity as a service. They're basically building a connectivity platform, and Connect provides a one-button connectivity platform that then their team can self-serve on, can come in and provision their gateways within clear swim lanes that have proper RBAC, and then have a single catalog of all those services. And on top of that, then they can productize those APIs, search them, have full analytics. Connect has got a number of new capabilities we announced around multi-geo support, around integration with AWS Marketplace, access to Connect's APIs through a token-based authentication model, this concept of runtime groups. It's just, the list is too long, but we introduced a whole bunch of stuff on Connect as well.
Fantastic. One question I've had about your product configuration, how does mesh fit into this? Is API gateway and that capability kind of foundational to the mesh, or is mesh another product on top of this? How does that fit together?
Yeah, it's a great question. So philosophically, on our product line, we got 4 products, and Connect, which brings them together, right? We got the Kong Gateway, Kong Ingress Controller, which we talked about, Kong Mesh, which you're bringing up, Kong Insomnia, which is our dev tool, and Connect, which brings them all together. And our philosophy around this stack is that it's an incremental buy-in model. We do not want to push the whole platform down folks' throat side. We just don't want to say you need to do the whole thing all at once. Or
it's not all or nothing, right?
Yeah. You can start with any and then progress in the other. Example, you can start with the mesh for service-to-service connectivity management. And our mesh is really designed to make it easy to use and work with both Kubernetes and non-Kubernetes environment. That's really why we created our mesh. But then no mesh is an island, right? It needs to have an ingress. And guess what? The Kong Gateway ingress works really well with the Kong Mesh solutions. You can just plug and play that and take advantage of the Kong Gateway. Now, if you suddenly have multiple teams doing that and you want to do that platform building stuff, you can tell all your teams to connect those gateways to Connect. And then now you have single pane of glass visibility across it, right, with RBAC. Same thing goes with our Insomnia, right? You can start with Insomnia to build APIs, consume APIs, but now you want to do GitOps for API specification, which is something we call API Ops. Well, you can generate from Insomnia, install a plugin and generate declarative config for our ingress controller or for our gateway. So it's just all meant to work together as pieces of the puzzle, and you start wherever you want.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. I can see how it fits together too. What is the most common path? Where do you find people that are, in the process of adopting cloud native and microservices, and maybe they've gotten their heads around service mesh yet? Usually, where do they start when they start working with Kong?
Yeah. So what we see is two very sort of clear bottom-up motions. I would say is end users typically will need a gateway. Right, that's a very clear one. Like I've built an app, or I've got a set of apps, but the security is missing, the rate limiting is missing. I need to build some custom logic on top of this to integrate my IDP, whatnot. So they start with the gateway. That's one. The other is developers need to just call some APIs, right? And this is an area that is fascinating to me because curl just not enough. They need to do collection of calls, build tests. So that's another starting point. That's insomnia. You got the gateway as a starting point. More and more we see mesh builders, like developers, really administrators who are like, I need zero trust security, so I need a mesh. That's also one. But more often than not, mesh comes in as an evolution after you've had gateway installed and you've figured the gateway side of the house out. So it's more of an evolution play. And then connect is really says how to run the whole thing much faster.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fantastic. That's super helpful. Well, tell us a little bit. I know you have sort of an incubation process that you bring technologies through before they come out to general availability. What are some of the kinds of things that you have in the works that you can talk about?
Yeah. So we are very excited to have announced the Kong Incubator project. So you can anyone can go to it and play around with technologies at incubator.konghq.com. And you will see a number of projects that have been launched there. One of them is called WASM X, which enables you to program anything in a WASM supported language like JavaScript, Golang, Rust, C++, and run them as Kong plugins effectively, right? So that's really cool. And it runs at native in-process speed. We introduced a new operator, which does, day two automation and management, and a new Kong gateway control plane that's entirely in Golang. And that's things like managing multiple versions of Kong gateway at once, or integrating very easily with different databases. So that one's called Coco. Everything at Kong has to start with K, of course. So lots of interesting stuff on the incubator side, yes.
Fantastic. Well, it's great to get exposure to things that are in the works and get an eye towards where it's heading. So do you do your summit once a year, or is this something you do more frequent than that?
Once every year. That's our event in San Francisco. And it was just great. The energy is still there. I feel we had enormous attendance and lots of good customer stories as well.
Very good. I imagine you're going to be at KubeCon. We'll see you there. I'll be there.
Of course, yeah. We'll have a big presence there, and also AWS reInvent. Those are the events.
And reInvent. Absolutely. Great. Yeah, absolutely. Two great conferences coming up just around the corner here. Well, it's been fantastic talk. Congrats on the announcements, especially, that big of a release, something you've been working on that long. It's nice to get that sort of out the door and in customers' hands and know that it's going to be going into production environments with customers. So Reza, great talking with you. And I hope you come back and tell us some more about Kong and new things that are happening, and especially sharing what customers are experiencing and what some of the challenges that they're seeing as they're adopting cloud native. We're all looking to learn from each other. And that's a great thing about both the vendor community, technology community, as well as end users and practitioners. So folks can learn more about Kong and your offerings. Best place to go is
KongHQ.com. Our website has everything you need. And yes, Mitch, thank you very much for having me. And it's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
This is Techstrong TV.
With the great pleasure of being joined by David Hustis. He is CEO of the Open NMS Group. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Mitch. Good to be here.
Good to have you here. Love to hear. Tell us a little bit about you. And of course, we're going to be talking about Open NMS and also which is the open source, and then the company Open NMS Group. Tell us a little bit about open source and then what your company does.
Yeah, so I'm David Hustis. I'm the CEO of Open NMS Group. Inc. is a North Carolina-based corporation. We've been in business since 2004. Myself and the original founders of the company had been in the network monitoring space for a long time, and we were taking a look at, this is right after the internet bomb, so to speak. 2001. We're now in 2004. Things are picking up, but we still felt like there was a big gap between what was being offered commercially and this really kind of cool thing going on with open source. There was a small company nearby called Red Hat.
Heard of them?
Yeah. And we were kind of like, well, let's take a page out of that book and see what we could do, because we were really, myself and one of the co-founders had been doing a lot of network management consulting, bringing in other products and trying to help customers fit their business to the product. And we felt like that was the wrong way, right? Let's fit the product to the business. And open source really kind of gave us that opportunity to do it. And, it's one thing when you spend a lot of time with products and you're doing any integrations, they'll say, hey, here's our API. And you go read the documentation on the API, and then you try to implement it and it doesn't behave that properly. And you're like, why is this working? But when you have the code, you can just go look and say, oh, here's what that really means, right? So there's no better documentation than the source code. And when you're a systems integrator and you're really, really trying to do, heroic efforts for your customers, being able to do things with open source just really empowers you to be able to do those kinds of things. And so we started off and we've been trying to do that work ever since.
I just had that conversation with one of my engineers this morning. Like, let's go dig in the code, find out what, and then we'll figure out how we're going to tackle that particular problem.
It's binary for a reason, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting. This is one of the first open source tools I used was actually an NMS tool, kind of pretty simple, but back in the 90s, I would guess. So it isn't new to the network management space or monitoring space, but it also hasn't been pervasive in taking it over. Or tell me if it has. I mean, it seems to me OpenNMS, it isn't solely unique, the only thing that's out there, but I don't have the impression there's like tons of network tools, monitoring tools that are open source. Is that true, or is the state differently today?
I think it ebbs and flows a little bit, right? But I think, in 2004, when we created the company, OpenNMS project had been around for a while, right? Mm-hmm. And there was some pretty significant VC that had been put in. The company that originally created it, that company eventually waned from existence, so to speak. And my business partner and co-founder, said, "Hey, I got this great idea." And I'm like, "Are you crazy?" Right? This doesn't sound like a business to me, And of course, nobody really knew what an open source business was then, and so we've kind of been on this path, and I think that in the monitoring space, at that time, open source was really had a high velocity of attention, and there was a lot of FUD as well coming from non-open source vendors and entities, but it was hey, let's build an open source tool. Everybody was building an open source thing because it was catching the wave. And then
2000 was really when the kind of open source business model started. Red Hat was early, but others started to adopt that, right, and figure out how to build a business around it.
Yeah, and I think Red Hat is probably the most successful open source business model that's been, and I think they did it right. With the they didn't have kind of the FOPN model, right, where you had some of it's open source, but some of it isn't. And not saying that that's a bad business model, because I think there have been successful businesses that way. But I think Red Hat, exemplifies what open source is about, and they've found a way to capitalize on that, on being committed to open source. We've been the same way. I said, for whatever reason, we stayed down in the weeds probably a little bit longer than we should have, like solving customer problems and high-fiving each other and going on to the next customer, rather than really focusing hard on trying to, grow a business. And through various relationships, we finally, met up with our investor, and they're actively putting money in and growing the business. And one of the great things our executive chairman shared with me when I first met with him, he asked me after I had presented to him what OpenNMS was doing, what I felt like we could do in the market, and he said, "Well, what would you change?" I said, "Well, other than everything I just told you? And he's like, no, really, what would you change, about your company, about your organization, about how you build software? And I was like, well, I hadn't really thought too much about that. And he says, well, I wouldn't change anything. And I'm like, oh, like this is a much different investor conversation than I've had ever in my life, right? So it was, so I think, we've kind of finally found the right partner, the right investor, and I think, there's a lot of velocity in the product right now. Your customers don't really recognize us from that perspective, because we'd run over here and we'd focus on this customer, we'd run over here and we'd focus on this customer, and all this work being done in the open, but it was fairly linear, right? And now we have a lot of advancements in the software and a lot of things happening all at once, and our customers are pretty excited about that and impressed with that. And so I'm, I think that's kind of been the big change. And again, back to the open source question about how many products are out there, I think there are, like I said, it ebbs and flows. Some have come, some have gone. I think if you're looking for an open source monitoring tool that does X, Y, Z, you're going to find it. I said, but there are also a lot more entrants into the monitoring space that aren't open source as well. And I think that's just really reflective of technology is moving so quickly, right? And you traditional, like, let's monitor a hub and a router and a switch and some access points, it's like all that is changing, into now I have, let's think about what is network as a service, right? So how does that change things, and who are, what are the dynamics there? And so I think that just introduces more opportunity for monitoring solutions to come in and kind of fill that gap. One quick thing I'll say is, like, I was on a call with our board and with another person of interest, and we were presenting technologies from the entire organization, and I was on the list to speak. Somebody went first, and they had all this really cool, amazing stuff they were talking about, and then somebody else came in and who had cool, amazing stuff, and he says, well, I'm not nearly as exciting as that guy. And then it came to me, I was like, well, if you want to talk about something not interesting, let's talk about monitoring. But I can tell you that when all that cool, exciting stuff isn't working, that's when monitoring gets very exciting. So, but back to your question about open source, I think that if there's a need, there's probably an open source tool out there.
Very true.
Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit. I mean, obviously, things have evolved a lot significantly since both OpenNMS was created and you kind of taking it over, getting involved. I know you had the Horizon release come out recently. Give us an idea of, like, sort of what is state of the art. What are the things that are coming out in OpenNMS?
So
by the way, spending time and learning your customers in the domain was a lot better than having money but not knowing. Smart on your part.
Well, I appreciate that. My wife might differ in your opinion. But
I don't have to pay your mortgage either.
Exactly. But we've been very, I don't know what the right word is, Mitch. Blessed, fortunate, but we've had a phenomenal set of customers. If you threw a dart at the biggest companies in the world, you're gonna hit one that's our customer, and what's really interesting to me about that is that I think maybe some of that focus is we've always tried to stay true to our word about being open source, and so you build a trust in your brand. We always have worked really hard to make sure that whatever we've told customers our product would do, it would do it. And when they would find problems, we'd work our butts off to make sure that those things went away. And one of the challenges with some of those biggest companies in the world is they also have the biggest networks in the world, right? And everything you have to do is at an incredible scale. And one of our product managers was showing me a website the other day of a competitor in the space, not a direct competitor, but another competitor to go look at. And they were like, well, if you have 5 nodes or you have 50 nodes, I'm like, we're talking about 50,000 nodes, right? It's different, right? And so so all the work that we do and have been doing is it takes an incredible effort to build something that's reliable, that will scale.
Will scale.
And you know, and one of the things we've done over the years is like, I think I remember when we first started the company in 2004, we said, okay, hey, let's focus on small, medium-sized businesses because those are, you know, they'll be the right budget. And the first customer that reached out to us directly, all our opportunities come to us, you know, right? We don't really do any outward marketing efforts, but what the first company that came in was GE. Right? And this was when GE was at the top of the top, and they were building their MPLS network, and they came to us and said, hey, we went to enterprise IT. This was like one of the first MPLS networks, global MPLS networks, and they said, hey, we need monitoring. And the licensing cost was going to cost them as much or more of the infrastructure they just deployed for monitoring it. And I was like, well, maybe that's the right price or the right value. I don't know. But they came to us and said, that's not working for us. And so we, you know, and so small and medium-sized business, we were wrong, right? Like OpenNMS's journey has been, you know, being deployed in, not all of our customers are giants, right? But a good portion of them are, and it really is a testament to the technology, because not only are those really big networks, those are companies that price isn't why they're coming to OpenNMS, right? Because if anybody could afford anything, they could, right? They could literally either fund or buy anything that they really felt that they needed. And so price really isn't what I think has been the value here, and it's been building that relationship, trusting the brand, and you know, I think to the detriment of the open source project, we have been for the last 6 or 7 years really focused hard on making sure that the reliability and the scalability and the capabilities are there. And also one of the challenges is our customers push us in directions that we need to add to the product. And so the product becomes very wide in its capabilities. Therefore, it becomes, there's almost an infinite number of settings, and there's almost an infinite number of ways you can solve any one problem. And that's also something that can be a strength and a weakness to some degree, because there can be a barrier to entry. So one of the things we've been doing in Horizon 30 is trying to fix that. And some of the infrastructure we've been really working hard on the code is making code plug in, making an API that it's not so difficult to deploy new technology in the ecosystem. So it's a plug-in infrastructure. You drop a file in, so to speak, and it just dynamically loads, and you're up and going. And you can unload it dynamically without shutting the system down. And there's really a lot of value to that, and it's not an easy thing to do, especially when you have an incredible amount of state. At any one time in our monitoring product, there may be 3 or 4 million things that are being done, right? Mm-hmm. All asynchronously, right? So it's an incredible balancing act to be able to scale, but also make things dynamically reliable and then dynamically loadable like that. So that was kind of the focus of Horizon 30, is solidifying that plug-in API.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's something that can be done very well and also can be done very poorly. And oftentimes, I'm not saying it was poorly in OpenNMS, but it takes a while to really figure out a plugin architecture that not only works and scales, but also has sort of the longevity that you can work with lots of different partners in doing. It's interesting. I really relate to what you're saying about the scale problem, because that is by far the number one issue almost every startup company faces with is, so how do we scale from working with a customer of 500 people to 500,000, right? Or a network size of this. And you can't get there until you're in it, right? You have to emulate those things. You have to get there. And that's one of the things I think open source has an advantage of, is they're not expecting you to get it right off the bat. They're willing to work with you, work with the project, work with the company, as you start to scale it. And whereas a lot of just pure startup companies is it's cover of a binary. Can you do it? Nope. Good. Move on. Yep. Okay. Prove it.
It's a little bit like, startup mentality too, right? You with your investor, you have to, there's a lot of anxiety sometimes because you're in a startup, you're saying, this is our strategy. And there's no real plan there that you could go measure, right? So this is our strategy. And then same way with our open source projects, most of our customers who have the champions that we've had that brought us into the organization really understood that this was a journey. Mm-hmm. And if there was something that was, that they did look at, it would be, is the project alive, right? What's the community look like? And that's been another blessing for us, is we've had a really great community that has been supportive of the project. And that really also lends itself to monitoring, especially a tool that is heterogeneous in nature, right? So you're looking at thousands of vendors, right? And there's no way we can build a lab that we can say we can monitor, all these different vendors' equipment, right? And so what we put things out there, they take it and they deploy it in their environments and they give us feedback, and whether it's configuration or behavior, idiosyncrasy, how do you say it? Idiosyncrasies, but little flaws in the ointment, so to speak, in some of these products that say, well, we do this, but they don't actually do that, or they don't adhere to the specification or that kind of thing. So we make little ways to work around those things. And there's, that's the nice thing about a project that's as old as OpenNMS, is that there are still bugs in Cisco's SNMP agent, right, that we've worked around, right? And I wouldn't even really necessarily call them bugs. They just had a different interpretation of the standard, right? And so they behave a little differently than, say, a Juniper or an Avaya or somebody like that.
So I'm curious about this in the software world and cloud native and all of those things. There's been big advancements from log aggregation management to observability, the OpenTelemetry project. And I know you have a daemon that plugs into your architecture for OpenTelemetry. How do you see the complementary of those two approaches? Because it wasn't built in a network world, but it was built in everything's got an agent and it's reporting now all those things for software devices or software appliances or code, not hardware boxes. And that's happened in your world.
Yeah, it's a good question, actually, and I see this as like an outcome of technology has come around to the point where we don't worry too much about bandwidth anymore. We don't worry too much about storage anymore. Mm-hmm. And processing power is through the roof, right? And so that is, when you look at monitoring for the history of that I've been in monitoring, those are things that we always had to find compromises for. It's like, we can't impact the network too much that we're monitoring. And now you just say, just add a little more bandwidth to give it a VPC or a VLAN or something, and you're off and go and throw as much data as you want at it, it seems like, until you start looking at egress charges and things like that. But right now in the enterprises, it doesn't seem like bandwidth is too much of a concern, other than trying to make sure that they have enough and tracking it and monitoring it and predicting and doing those kind of things that we help them do. But in the monitoring side, one of the things that I've always been a proponent of from as a philosophy is to not be in the problem that you're monitoring. So you can't really see a problem if you're in it. Mm-hmm. And so I think observability is what has evolved from that same kind of philosophy, is to be able to sit outside, let whatever's in there be able to send you data, outside of that system, and be able to analyze it and put it into these infrastructures today. They're really incredible, self-indexing, it's like structured data, who cares anymore? This is what, network monitoring used to be, was very, structured data done in like
SNMP. You talked about it. That was the model.
Yeah, and SNMP meant simple, not because it was simple to create an agent, not because it was simple to create a manager. It was simple on the network, right? So every part of that monitoring ecosystem was well defined, right? Everything from serialization to the packets, protocols, and packet sizes, and how what the schemas look like, the language the schemas are written in, the security around it. Every piece of that was defined so that you could be very light on the network, which is like today's. It used to be when we did monitoring, we would look at our own graphs at the ecosystem and say, you could see SNMP was taking up 25% of the network traffic. And today, if you tried to measure that, it's like 0.0025% of the traffic because the bandwidth is
packets flowing around. Nobody notices.
You never know it, right? Exactly. Yeah. But today, now that they have all this bandwidth and you have all this capacity for sending unstructured data and doing analysis and the tooling and the logic systems, that are available to be able to make an understanding and interpretation of that data. There's no way you could have done that, even just 10 years ago, right? It just.
I think that's one of the key things about it. I remember with cloud coming on the scene, people were calling it just somebody else's computer. I'm like, no, take away the constraints of processing, network, storage that we all lived with, since the dawn of computing.
Yeah.
Essentially, you don't have those. There's cost to it, but now what would you do differently? And that's sort of happened in your world. Well, I know you're working on Horizon 31. I think we're probably to the end of our time. I'd love to hear more about it. Maybe you can come back and we can chat some more. It's a great space, and the way security is converged into the software, the network is converged into the platform engineering. We're bringing these things together, and they aren't quite the silos they've been.
No, for sure.
For so many years, and I'm sure that's you have some views and experiences on that too, and I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, well, on the subject of Horizon 31, so we are actively in R&D building a SaaS-based platform. One of the challenges when you do go to those scales with monitoring, you depend on an ecosystem that can sustain that that volume of data. And so when you deploy on OpenNMS and you deploy an OpenNMS and you want to, say some of our customers have 350, 400,000 flows per second coming into the system, you need a robust, reliable, highly available infrastructure, not only in OpenNMS, but in a way of processing that data that gives you capacitance, gives you don't lose data when things are being, maybe updated or connections are failing or whatever. You have capacitance in the system. So we were one of the first adopters, I think. We're an early adopter of the Kafka technology that was released by LinkedIn as an open source project. That has grown into a major component of a way to scale OpenNMS. We have our own message broker built in. But if you really need to scale up, you want to set a broker up outside, and then that has its own life of its own, right? It's a Kafka-based infrastructure, and then big time big data storage. We have a couple different technologies that we can leverage. Elasticsearch for one, so that's another ecosystem of its own, and then Cassandra or ScyllaDB. Those products we can leverage as well. And so one of the challenges our customers think that all that's great, but how do I get beyond having to set all that stuff up myself? So Horizon 31, we're introducing Cloud Connect technology so that you can have on-prem solution that will be able to start consuming some of the cloud resources that we're building for our own SaaS application while you're still on-prem. So being able to just basically make a one-line change in your configuration in OpenNMS, and everything still behaves the same, but now all your storage is going to a cloud resource that we're offering, as an optimized solution. So the Cloud Connect technology is in Horizon 31 that helps reduce the barrier to entry when you're deploying and you want to do OpenNMS at scale.
And barrier to entry, and then how do you help your customers get out of the tool business, right? They should business and not in trying to stitch it all together. Well, where can folks find out more? Where can they get a hold of the open source? What's the best way to engage with OpenNMS if they haven't?
Well, my cell phone number is I'm sorry.
Publish that. I've already put that on Facebook and all.
I think OpenNMS.com. Come in, contact us. Sales at OpenNMS.com. Obviously, you could write, or even just info at OpenNMS.com. And I promise you, we're not going to aggressively target you. But if you are interested, we have resources that are available to help you and talk to you. And we also publish, or we spent a lot of time in our open source forum. So we use Mattermost, and we host a Mattermost solution. So you chat.openms.com, I think it is. And so you come there and just log in and start asking questions, right? So you'll get dropped into town hall. Where do I go from here? We'll tell you where to go to ask your question, and tell you where to go.
Check that. Very much a community-based, community-based open source.
Yeah. And then Discourse, we have a lot of articles on Discourse, and you can come in and also engage in conversation there.
Great. David, Eustace, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Appreciate the time we got to spend together, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Take care.
Yeah, take care.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Francois Lapiteau, who is Chief Product Officer for Odasiva, and they are in the business of backing up SaaS applications, which turns out to be a little more challenging than most people realize. Francois, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So we have seen this massive proliferation of SaaS platforms, and I think a lot of people just assume somehow or other that magically that data will be protected. But once you get into the notion that you do need to protect that data, it's a little more challenging than people realize. So maybe walk us through a little bit, if you would, what's required to protect data in these SaaS platforms, and where are the gotchas?
Sure, no, definitely. And so just some words about Odasiva. So we have been in the business for 10 years now, and our mission, right, is to protect and secure SaaS application, and more specifically, Salesforce. So this is where we are really focusing on. And this is coming exactly from what you say, right? We early on got customers that moved from on-premise world to a SaaS application, and they presume that actually, everything was magic, and that the SaaS provider will protect him against any issues, even like their own mistakes. But unfortunately, it's not the case, right? And that's why we are speaking a lot about shared responsibility concept, where the SaaS provider is responsible for the data, and if the SaaS provider is doing mistake or if having some troubles, is responsible for the protection of this data. But on the other side, if as a user, as a customer of the SaaS provider, I'm doing a mistake, I have a system that have wrong integration and is going to delete information into the SaaS providers, I'm responsible for that. And that's where we call it the shared responsibility. And I think that now more and more people understand this concept and take decision to invest in a backup solution for the SaaS providers. But for a very long time, this has not been the case. And the second point with the SaaS, I think, and this is why, we spoke about the API, is in the on-premise world, the backup was actually great and simple. You had your hard drive, it was in your infrastructures, it was a database, it was a file system. You were able to simply just take a copy of that, put it somewhere, and in case of incident, you just restore it, right? But with a SaaS application, is a completely different story, because you do not have access directly to the system. You cannot do a straight backup, a dump of your Oracle database, right? That's where you have to play with the API. You have to play with the API provided by the SaaS application to be able to run this backup, and also obviously the restoration, because the value of that is really to be able to protect and be able to restore what you have changed. And so the fact that you don't have access to the DB, you have to go through the API. And this API have constraints, right? So the first one is usually because we are speaking about SaaS applications, we are speaking about the fact that you are sharing infrastructures with other customers, right? It's a concept of multi-tenant, which means that every SaaS providers have put in place some limitations to be sure that one person is not going to eat the resources of the other person in the same environment. And so that's the first aspect of it. You need to be able to, you need to be aware of this limitation. And when you are running mass operation on your data to be able to protect them, you need to be, have consciousness of this limit. And then you need to create a system that respects this limit and understands this limit. The second one, I think also is the fact that these APIs that you got are not unlimited in terms of resources. It means that you may have different API for different needs. And so if you want to optimize your processes to be able to have the best restore point objective and the best restore time objective is really to be able to optimize the speed. And for that, again, you need to be sure that you are leveraging the right API to have the fastest process, to be able to parallelize the right API. And finally, once you get all your data in the right way, you need to be able to restore it. And the restoration, again, it's not like simply adding records inside a database, right? You have constraints that you need to take in account, which means your restoration process need to be pretty smart, actually, to be able to handle all the different nuance of your SaaS applications.
How often does this happen? I mean, people perceive that the SaaS applications are always available, but is it more common than people think when there's an issue around a crash or something becoming unavailable?
Yeah, I mean, actually, you will be surprised. You will be surprised. You know, it's all the time you think that is never going to happen to you, right? It's somebody else's issues. But actually, you know, we have a lot of customers and it happened, right? It happened more than you think. It happened for multiple reasons, right? The first one is you have a lot of integrations, right, that you connect to your SaaS applications. Usually, in a company may have like 120 applications on the SaaS that they are using every day. So they need to connect them to each other. And then each integration can actually go sideways, go a little bit in the wrong direction and then corrupt the data. So you need to restore. The other issue is just people, right? People who access the system, who may do wrong things, delete the files, modify wrong files. And again, it's happening. Or like a developers that is just running a process on the data and he was thinking that he may run this on the development environment, but actually by mistake, he used a production URL and he ran it on productions. So it actually happened all the time. And that's why we are here for our customers to be sure that when it happens, they can go back on their step pretty fast.
There's a premium too now on recovery, because usually if there's an issue, sometimes it involves ransomware or something of that ilk. In a lot of organizations, you're trying to get that data back as quickly as you can, but do they realize that those APIs may be throttled and that becomes an issue? Because I guess my question is how long does it take to recover?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I think that even when speaking about the time to recover, I think one notion that people really need to be aware of is how much data are you ready to lose? Because, for example, when you do a backup, right, you all the time have a frequency of backup, which makes sense. So let's say you are doing a daily backup. Daily backup means that even if you have an incident, you pretty much are ready to lose 1 day of data. And, sometimes 1 day of data for certain customers may be okay. For some others, if you think about customer service support, right? If you are losing 1 day of interaction with your customers, this is not really acceptable. If you are using 1 day of leads that come up to your application, SaaS application, this is not acceptable. So I think the first step before to think about the speed of restoration, it's really to think about how much data are you ready to lose, and then based on that, you will specify your backup frequency. So you can daily, 4 hours, 1 hour. So for example, in our case, with our customers, we offer down to 15 minutes. which means that the maximum of data you are going to lose is 15 minutes. But then, obviously, back to your questions about the restoration. The speed of restoration is obviously a key requirement. And we ran some survey, and 74% of people in general, and not our customers, but a survey of the SaaS application, 74 take more than 1 day. And again, it's all based on your business, right? How long can you wait to be able to restore this information? But also, I think you leverage and you highlight a right point about ransomware, right? Ransomware, so we ran a survey pretty recently. And so we find out that actually 51% of the ransomware target SaaS applications, which is actually pretty high. And the worst number actually is 52% of this attack are successful, which means that people using SaaS applications, they may likely be hit by ransomware. So this is where obviously a backup application is very, very important. And what we saw also on this survey is actually 50% of these people do not recover the SaaS application if they don't have the right protections. So I think this is a real threat there that, again, I think that a lot of companies are starting to really be aware and take action on that. But I think for business, it's really, really, really important.
How do I know that the malware that attacked me in the first place isn't in my backup copy as well? And so how do I kind of ensure the integrity of the backup?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think that there is two answers to that. The first one is you should separate the two systems. That's not obvious, but it's really important, which means like your backup system and your SaaS application should not be on the same platform, should not be provided by the same person, because obviously you are increasing the risk that if the person is able to attack your main SaaS application and get access to your SaaS application, they will be able to access them the backup because it will be on the same system. So I think rules number one is really about be able to separate your backup from your live system. Rules number two is, and this is what we have put in place, is to be able to have irreversibility into your system, which means that once you create a backup, that even if the person access the backup informations, that they cannot alterate this backup. So even if the malware integrates your live system, corrupts the data, that your backup system, you cannot change the backup that has been done in the past. And this is what we have implemented at Odaceva to ensure that your backup system cannot be corrupted by malware. And the second point that also on this area that is really important, I think, is about the encryption of the data. So the fact that when you are doing a backup system, obviously you are taking over all your information from one system to another system. So you are going to move from your SaaS provider to your backup provider, which means that you need to have exactly the same level of security on both sides because they are going to contain the same data. But also when you move on your backup system, it's really important to separate the person who have access to control the backup and the person who have access to be able to see the data. So to be able to do that at Odaceva, for example, what we have done is we are encrypting our backup with a key owned only by the customers. And this separation of responsibility is allowing people who have access to the backup system to not be able to read the data because they do not own the encryption key. So it's like a third layer of security, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Who's in charge of backup these days, given ransomware? Is it the typical administrator for the SaaS platform or the security people getting involved?
I think that this has been actually one of the reasons why people were thinking that SaaS, were doing these capabilities is for a very long time, SaaS has been more like, owned by the ghost IT of the company, like the business unit have a need. They don't necessarily are on top of the list of the IT department. So they may start to use a product. And obviously, they are not experts in IT, right? So they are not experts in the fact that they need to back up their system because they are primarily business users. They may be like customer service or sales or marketing, right? And so the fact that the SaaS, initially speaking, has been more owned by the business unit was the reason why the issue about backup came. But now, more and more these days, obviously, the IT department is more owning globally the SaaS application of the enterprise. So I think it's really moving these days from before being really owned by the business unit in the companies, moving more like to a centralized IT department where they now more control and a holistic view of all the system. And I think that one thing that we see with our largest customers is usually they've created also some kind of like center of excellence. So even if it's owned by the business, they've created this center of excellence that kind of like bringing like IT skills into the mix to be sure that there is governance around all these SaaS applications.
So it's part of that movement towards what we call SaaS ops. But how hard is it to set up the data protection for all these different applications that are out there? I mean, do I have to be a rocket scientist or can I be a mere mortal?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all depends on what solution you are going for, right? What we can see with our customers is some customers are deciding that, so some SaaS customers are deciding that I'm going to do my own system. I'm going to leverage API myself directly. And usually this is not really handling really well because, again, based to the fact that the SaaS API are really complex, that they have hard limit, that you need to manage the speed, that you need to understand how you are going to restore, and the nitty-gritty about that. The build yourself kind of approach is not really working. Then if you go for a SaaS backup vendors, then usually it's really straightforward to be able to implement. Now I think that what people underestimate is the fact that having a backup in place is really important, obviously, but being ready when you need to do a restore is also extremely important. And so that's why we are, for example, on our side, we are training our customers to be able to ready with the restoration, to be able also to run some auditing tools, to be able to inspect their SaaS application, to be able to be sure that they are going to remove every safeguard that are going to block them to be able to restore.
All right. Hey, Francois, thanks for the insights. I think a lot of people probably thought this was a lot simpler than it is, and maybe somebody else was going to do it on their behalf. But as always, there's work to be done. We hope to have you back on the show again one of these days soon.
Thank you very much.
All right. Back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Shahar Azaleh, who's the CEO for GroundCover. They are pioneering advancements in application performance management for Kubernetes. And we're going to be talking about what is the challenges with managing and monitoring Kubernetes environments. Shahar, welcome to the show.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me.
We have had APM tools forever and a day, and a lot of people are also talking about observability these days. What makes APM in the context of Kubernetes different, and why do we need a platform to address those issues?
So I think a few major things have changed, like due to Kubernetes. Kubernetes brings a lot of advantages. Basically, it's an amazing abstraction system from everything that is managing your deployment and managing your scale. Basically, as a developer, you don't have to know how to do these things. Kubernetes knows how to do it for you. But this abstraction also created a lot of difficulty in figuring out what the heck is my applications doing, basically. So if we look to the past, like the back to the monolith era of a single machine running a single code, developers used to SSH into the machine to debug stuff. Kubernetes doesn't allow that anymore. I mean, pods just come to life and disappear, and it's really hard to figure out what is going on without actually monitoring the Kubernetes stack and the application stack together. And the other thing is basically the scale. I mean, if before you ran like a single monolith based on Java or whatever on a server, and you had to monitor that process as an APM, now there's like 250 servers running all across these nodes, services, running all across these nodes, and figuring out what's happening with all of this makes stuff more difficult, basically.
Right. So the applications are inherently more distributed, and we wind up with all these dependencies and the application may not fall over, but you could spend weeks, months trying to figure out why it slowed down because a particular microservice isn't operating the way it's supposed to. And that becomes a challenge in its own right. Who is driving that conversation? Do you think that that is within the purview of a DevOps team, or is it the application owner, or ultimately who's the one who wakes up in the morning and says, we have a problem, Houston?
So I think that part of the reason that things became so API driven and so complex, and we're seeing all these new professions emerge like SRE and production engineering. Basically, it's really hard to figure out the entire picture of what's going on in production just by knowing a single service and monitoring that, or just by knowing the infrastructure and the way my CI/CD is built and the way my operations built to get my deployments into production. So there's a lot of vacuum created between DevOps and Dev, and I think there's a lot of different positions currently emerging to solve that. But basically, we're seeing developers shifting into positions which are more either self-contained responsibility. Basically, I'm responsible for my application from development to actual production, and I'm responsible to get it monitored and working. Or I'm as a profession responsible for production, but I'm a developer, kind of blurring the bounds between what is DevOps and what is development, which I think makes sense in complex environments. You can't detach the two.
So it's becoming a little more of a team sport per se, but it doesn't seem like we're going to shift responsibility entirely left to developers. There's just not enough quote unquote full stack people out there. However, as we go forward, do you think that IT operations teams are a little intimidated by microservices and Kubernetes and the whole environment? So they maybe not engaging in it as quickly as they could because they're basically, how do I manage all this stuff, even if I do get it up and running?
I think it's intimidating because a lot of people don't really know the tech. And I think we're at a stage of, development, software engineering, basically, that development stacks have become so complex that no one is expected to understand everything. So it is intimidating. I mean, even highly trained DevOps at big organizations sometimes don't really know Kubernetes all the way through. They know, the basics, bits and bytes that they had to learn to figure out how to use it. There's a lot of intimidation there. And I think people know segments of what they're doing. For example, what's like the basic best ways to separate a monolith into a microservice architecture with, a different business logic running, and how should I operate there? But it's hard for an organization to actually control this entire understanding of what is Kubernetes. Is it right for this specific use case? How do I actually use it for my actual use case to get the most out of it? I think it is intimidating. Basically, it's a really complex system, and no one basically knows it all the way through. Although you can get to use it really fast, so it's kind of it creates kind of a dissonance between what you can actually use and what you can actually understand. And I think some developers are intimidated by that.
Now, you guys are using the phrase APM, and other folks are now touting observability platforms. Is there a difference in your mind, or is one beget the other?
I think an APM basically is trying to claim the full responsibility for the application layer. I think that we're used to to either the three pillars of observability, the basic pitch of, logs, metrics, and traces. And as time passed, because the stack became so complex, we've seen a lot of kind of auxiliary tools emerging, trying to cover part of the infrastructure that an APM like Datadog or New Relic couldn't get, like getting more insights from Kubernetes or getting more insights from different other deployment methods. So I think we're kind of diverged into solutions that try to help the APMs get better and catch up with the technology. By saying that we're an APM, we're trying to say that we'll take full responsibility of the applications running in Kubernetes. For us, it means that we will monitor infrastructure all the way to application, which basically an APM holds all these tiers together. Using eBPF, we kind of break these tiers and allow all the value at once. But basically, we're saying, we'll monitor the application from metrics to traces, from logs of the application. We're not an auxiliary tool just claiming we can get better insights from Kubernetes as an infrastructure. We're gonna monitor the applications as well. So I think that's us saying we're an APM.
What would be the relationship between an APM and Prometheus then going forward, which a lot of people are using for monitoring the cluster itself? Is that a data source for you, or do I just no longer need it?
I think Prometheus Grafana, first of all, I mean, the family of these open source solutions, first, they're amazing. We're big fans, users in the past, and definitely appreciative of these solutions. And I think a lot of the reason they caught on so strongly is that APMs just can't provide the value in high scale and high throughput environments. Basically, you turn to these open source stacks to provide infrastructure monitoring. It's not like that Datadog or New Relic or these other big players can provide what Prometheus monitoring, like Prometheus exporters and Grafana could give you as a stack. But people turn to that because it doesn't make sense to pay so much or store so much at the vendor side to get these value. So I think we're not a data source. We're not seeing ourselves as complement this stack, but we do believe that a lot of our customers are in this stack already using Prometheus for custom metrics, which basically these are fitted to the specific business logic you're running. So we're trying to bring our data, which is completely self-contained. GroundCover provides metrics out of the box all across the system from infrastructure to application. We're trying to bring them back as Prometheus compatible data source to your stack, to where you're working, because we're not trying to pull you away from the open source stack you're already working in. If you have a dashboard, of other stuff you're already doing, we're going to complement that with, APM grade metrics, traces, and logs that we just catch with eBPF.
So if that's the case, as we go forward, we hear a lot about artificial intelligence. Can we find a way to use the data we're collecting to kind of save us from ourselves? I imagine someday we might see, I don't know, a danger Will Robinson button that says, hey, if you go do what you're about to do, your job's in danger or something of that nature. But, how smart can smart get?
I think the first step there is basically first distributing the way observability works. I mean, if we look at the security domain in the past decade, it clearly went through a similar process that observability is now going through, only much earlier. I mean, from, endpoint security to like EDRs and these solutions that basically run rule engines at the edge, crunching data at the edge, making decisions at the edge close to where the data is. Observability is still stuck a long, long way back at the position where you ship all this data to the observability vendor and there things happen, basically. So you pay for this data, you ship all this data. So, but first we're distributing the decision-making in the observability stack. So our agent basically can decide what to collect. Is it an interesting case to collect? Is this an interesting fragment of data that can help you troubleshoot? And there's a lot of algorithms and machine learning and thoughtful thinking there on what to collect and how to collect in order to make observability first very data efficient and very focused on the things you care about. That's the first step on just making the passive part of that really intuitive, smart, integrated with the way you actually troubleshoot and work as an SRE, as a DevOps, as a dev. Later on, it can definitely go a step further into more the active part of you managing production and doing other stuff there. And does this deployment make sense? For example, like canary deployments, is this deployment actually working as expected right now in production? Should we alert on that? Based on the different baselines that the agents see on the previous versions that you just deployed and so on. So definitely, a lot of the logic is going to go there. I think the first part is distributing it and creating agents or, front end parts running at the data side that can make these decisions in a way that you don't have to store tons of data just to get these insights. That's the first part that we're trying to at least push forward.
Right. So the idea is rather than choking on a massive amount of data that I'm centralized somewhere, I am doing the analytics more closer to the point where the data is being created in the first place. And then I'm kind of sharing the aggregate results in a way that makes it possible for mere mortals to understand what's going on. Is that the core idea?
Yeah. I mean, basically, first of all, using eBPF in a high level outcome or product. That's the first thing ground cover does. eBPF is a really raw technology. It's amazing. It's an amazing sensor. You can basically get insights from anywhere, from the kernel to the infrastructure of Kubernetes all the way to the application. First of all, we're trying to wrap this up for the developers in a really high level input, as you say, that a person would figure out what's going on, but basically also kind of digest the data on the fly. We create, for example, a lot of matrix from raw data as they fly by through the agent without writing them to disk or sending them anywhere. Now, without having you pay for, say like 10K of spans per second just to get the latency metrics you want to, put your SLO on as a business. So we're creating a lot of stuff inside the agent on the fly, letting it learn baselines and figure out if there are deviations from baselines and so on, and capturing raw data when the rule-based engine basically decides that something is interesting, like a high latency request or a broken status code or some kind of deviation from normal behavior or anything, a lot of different stuff that we're currently doing in the agent side.
All right, so this is not your father's proverbial agent. This is taking advantage of ePF at the microkernel level inside the operating system to capture and process that data that's required. Do you guys think that eBPF is going to change the way we think about monitoring and observability because of this capability? I'm not sure. I think maybe you're one of the first platforms out there that's invoking that subsystem. So what's your ultimate expectations from eBPF?
First of all, I think, ground cover is one of probably the best teams in the world on eBPF, but it's not because we're amazing. It's because we have to be very, very good at it because it's still a raw technology. It's still a very fast moving technology. I mean, the community currently there is kind of moving under our feet as we contribute back to it and take value from the community back to what we're doing. So for example, even the protocols that eBPF covers and the capability that it covers are changing on a monthly basis. So we have to be very good at it and do as much as we can and push eBPF. So we're big believers in eBPF due to that. But we believe that in a few years, eBPF is going to be a commodity all across the stack. We see it in networking, like service meshes and network policies moving to eBPF. We see it in security already. A lot of security stacks like endpoint security and workload security are already moving to being executed by eBPF. And in observability, I think it's specifically interesting because it also changes the organizational behavior of what observability is. You're used to integrating an APM from the dev team. You're used to talking to the dev team, data team and backend team, please integrate this SDK into your code and let's deploy to production and see the value of this APM we just deployed. Suddenly one guy in DevOps, for example, can deploy you on a production at 1,000 people company. So it's also a really interesting organizational change of how hard it is, how pre-planning is involved in integrating the APM. And I think eBPF is definitely going to create major shifts there in how fast you can deploy, undeploy, try out a new APM. I think it's really different than what it is today. It's much harder to do these stuff.
Do you think APMs and cloud native therefore will be more pervasive? Because in legacy monolithic environments, it was people only used it for the most mission critical application because the agents were hard to deploy, manage, and update, and the whole thing was kind of expensive. So are we getting to the point where APMs will be a much more democratized thing in the land of Kubernetes?
Yeah, I think the first things we see teams currently doing is, as you say, I mean, they're forced to be in a position where they actually calculate the trade-off of costs and visibility of their application. It doesn't make sense. I mean, we see teams actually making decision of let's not deploy an APM on this application. It's too high scale. We can't keep up with the cost there, and let's just monitor this one, which we know is mission critical and stuff like that. This is a position where you don't want to put developers teams. So first of all, figuring out how to make APM scalable, regardless of eBPF, how to sample the data differently, how to make things not volume-based priced, to not cause so much pain and so much, kind of fear from the unpredictable build that's going to come in the next months for teams around APMs. So that's the first step. And I think later on, eBPF also unravels a lot of different stuff about what is covered and what is not. I mean, you're used to choosing, kind of cherry picking where you integrate the SDK, and we also see it, for example, in legacy code. I mean, there's always this legacy code no one wants to touch in a high scale enterprise. No one wants to change the code. No one wants to integrate new stuff there, so it's always left behind. eBPF suddenly monitors everything with kind of not differentiating between anything. So we can also see, for example, the control plane of Kubernetes. We can monitor sidecars if you have them in production, like Nginxes running in the background if you're using them as proxies or whatever. So we can actually monitor everything that you're running, even though you didn't cherry pick where to kind of integrate the APM. And I think teams are surprised about what you can cover with an APM. They're used to seeing it from the perspective of what they chose to monitor rather than what they're actually is going on in production, basically.
All right, cool. Hey guys, you heard it here. You don't have to tell anybody anymore that their application is just too big to manage, or for that matter, not important enough. You can give everybody the equal attention they deserve. Shahar, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, guys, back to you in the studio.
Hi again, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of Techstrong TV. We had some amazing interviews with industry professionals to give you the latest in the tech world. And alongside our airing of DevOps Unbound and Engineering the Change, we had plenty of great content today. We'll be back again on Thursday, so we hope to see you then. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. As always, stay strong. Techstrong.